The great hall was a cavern of deepening blue and grey stone, a place built for the echoes of 1,000 hurried footsteps, but which now held only the sound of one. The sun had long since surrendered its post, leaving behind a final, fading wash of soft violet and pale gold light that filtered down through the immense arched glass of the ceiling far, far above. It was a cathedral to journeys, and in this quiet evening hour, it felt as though it were holding its breath, waiting. The air itself seemed heavy with the weight of departures and arrivals, a silent testament to countless stories that had begun and ended on this very floor. The polished stone underfoot reflected the dying light in long, hazy streaks, creating the illusion of a still, dark lake stretching out before me. My own footsteps, slow and deliberate, were the only percussion in the vast, silent symphony of the space, each soft tap of leather on stone rising up to be swallowed by the immense vaulted emptiness. The grandeur of the architecture, with its soaring pillars that disappeared into the shadows overhead, was not intimidating, but calming, a profound and stable presence that promised stillness. There was a particular scent in the air, a mixture of cold stone, the faint, clean aroma of polish and something else, something older, like the smell of distant rain on pavement. It was the smell of time itself, captured within these walls. I could hear the almost imperceptible hum of the station's lifeblood, a low, distant electrical thrum that was more a feeling in the soles of my feet than a sound in my ears. It was the gentle, sleeping heartbeat of the building. My gaze drifted upwards, following the curve of a massive iron support beam, tracing its path into the twilight gathering in the rafters. The silence was so complete that I felt I could almost hear the slow, graceful dance of dust motes as they caught the last of the light, tiny golden specks performing a final, silent ballet in the air before darkness claimed them completely. It was a silence that invited introspection, a quiet that gently pushed away the noise of the day, of the city left behind, leaving only the tranquil reality of this present moment. My eyes found the station's great clock, suspended high on the far wall like a stoic, patient moon. Its face was a pale cream, its numerals elegant and Roman, its great dark hands seeming to move with an impossibly slow grace. The brass that encircled its face and formed its ornate hands caught a final brilliant sliver of the descending twilight, glowing with a soft coppery fire against the deepening shadows. It looked less like a keeper of time and more like a guardian of it, a silent sentinel watching over the peaceful transition from day to night. I watched the long, slender second hand complete a full, unhurried circle, a minute of my life passing in perfect, uninterrupted silence. There was no rush here, no frantic energy. The clock did not command. It simply observed. Its presence a comforting reminder that time could also be a gentle, flowing river, not just a relentless torrent. A profound sense of peace settled over me, a quiet wave washing away the residual tension from the journey to get here. It was a feeling of rightness, of being in the exact place I was meant to be at this exact moment. This vast empty hall felt like a decompression chamber, a necessary and beautiful pause between the world outside and the world I was about to enter. The anticipation I felt was not a nervous flutter, but a calm, steady warmth spreading through my chest, a quiet excitement for the slow, gentle hours of travel that lay ahead, a journey measured not in speed, but in serenity. It was a departure from everything that was loud and demanding, a deliberate step into a space of quiet contemplation. This feeling, this grand and solemn stillness, reminded me of the illustrations in old storybooks I had cherished as a child. It was the feeling of standing at the very edge of a magical realm, the moment before stepping through the wardrobe or onto the platform for a train to a school of witchcraft and wizardry. It was the tangible presence of possibility, the air thick with the promise of a story about to unfold. These old stone walls seemed to know the importance of such beginnings, of creating a threshold that was both magnificent and deeply personal. It was a space that understood the need for a slow, thoughtful transition, allowing the mind to catch up with the body, to fully arrive in the present before proceeding to the next chapter. A single, serene thought formed in the quiet of my mind, to simply embrace this slowness, to let the world outside fall away completely. There was nothing left to do from the day that had passed, and nothing that needed to be done for the journey ahead, other than to simply be present for it. It was a conscious decision to release the grip of plans and schedules, to let go of the mental lists and the nagging worries, and to simply exist within this peaceful, cathedral-like space. I would not hurry to the platform. I would let the train wait. I would honor this moment of quiet, for it was the true beginning of the journey, the silent, deep breath before the first word of the story is spoken. And so, I took that breath, a slow, deliberate inhale that filled my lungs with the cool, clean air of the hall. I felt my shoulders, which I hadn't realized were tense, soften and fall. I shifted the gentle weight of my travel bag, its familiar heft a comforting anchor. My gaze swept across the hall one last time, committing the play of light and shadow to memory, a perfect, still image of tranquility. Then, with a gentle sense of purpose, I turned my body towards the ornate iron gate that led to the platforms, my destination now not just a track number, but a state of being that I was slowly, peacefully approaching. My hand closed around the cool, heavy brass of the gate's handle, the metal solid and reassuring beneath my palm. So I pushed, and it swung open with a deep, resonant groan that was the only sound to disturb the silence. The action was slow, the sound echoing slightly before being absorbed by the stone. As I stepped through the gateway, the air changed immediately. It was cooler out here, crisper, carrying the scent of the night and the faint metallic tang of the railway tracks. The muffled hum of the station hall was gone, replaced by the vast open silence of the night sky above the platform. The platform stretched out before me, a long, elegant ribbon of dark stone disappearing into the distance. It was almost entirely deserted. Old-fashioned lamps stood at regular intervals, their warm golden light pooling on the ground, creating islands of gentle brightness in the deep indigo of the evening. The air was still, and the light from the lamps did not flicker, but shone with a steady, unwavering glow. And there, waiting patiently alongside the platform, was the train. It was long and dark, a sleek, sleeping giant resting in the twilight. Its carriages were painted a deep, midnight blue that seemed to drink in the surrounding darkness, making the warm light that emanated from within each window seem all the brighter, all the more inviting. Each window was a small, glowing diorama, a promise of the comfort and warmth that lay within its walls. A gentle breeze whispered along the platform, too soft to be called a wind, but just enough to stir the air. It carried with it the distant rhythmic sound of the train's engine, a low, steady thrum, thrum, thrum that was more like a deep, slow pulse than the sound of a machine. It was a hypnotic, comforting sound, the gentle heartbeat of the journey to come. I began to walk, my footsteps now making a soft, crunching sound on the fine gravel that bordered the stone platform. The sound was grounding, each step a quiet confirmation of my presence in this peaceful, expectant place. The sheer length of the train was impressive, carriage after carriage linked together in a silent, powerful chain, ready to pull me gently through the sleeping world. My eyes were drawn to one of the windows as I walked past. I could see the edge of a rich burgundy curtain, its velvet fabric seeming to absorb the soft light from the lamp inside. The glass was immaculately clean, and at its edges, a delicate filigree of condensation was beginning to form, blurring the line between the warmth inside and the coolness of the night outside. It was a small, perfect detail, a tiny painting of coziness. I imagined someone inside, settled into a comfortable seat, looking out at a lone figure on the platform, and I felt a strange and pleasant sense of anonymous connection to the other unseen travelers, each of us on our own quiet personal journey, yet sharing this single moving sanctuary. As I drew closer to the designated carriage, I saw a figure standing in an open doorway, bathed in the warm light from within. It was an attendant, dressed in a crisp, dark uniform, waiting to welcome the train's few passengers. The light spilled out from the doorway, illuminating a small rectangle of the platform stone, a golden welcome mat. The attendant stood with a calm, patient posture, a figure of serene hospitality. The brass handrails on either side of the steps gleamed under the carriage lights, polished to a soft, warm sheen, inviting me to reach out and pull myself aboard, to leave the solid ground of the station behind, and enter the gentle, rolling world of the train. The attendant offered a soft, gentle smile as I approached, a gesture of quiet welcome that needed no words. The voice, when it came, was low and soothing, a perfect match for the tranquil atmosphere of the evening. It was a simple greeting, yet it was imbued with a genuine warmth, a sense of being truly seen and welcomed. From the open doorway, a subtle and wonderful aroma drifted out to meet me, the scent of clean, pressed linen, of old, well-cared-for wood, and a faint, almost imperceptible hint of chamomile. It was the scent of rest, the very essence of comfort made manifest in the cool night air. The combination of the warm light, the gentle welcome, and this calming fragrance was an irresistible invitation to step out of the night and into the refuge that awaited. My gaze fell upon the attendant's uniform for a moment. It was impeccably neat, the dark fabric of the jacket perfectly pressed, the small brass buttons catching the light with a soft glint. There was a comforting orderliness to it, a reassuring professionalism that promised a journey where everything was taken care of, where all one had to do was relax and be carried along. This attention to detail, this quiet dedication to creating a perfect atmosphere of calm, felt like an incredible gift, a clear signal that this was not just a means of transport, but a curated experience of profound peace and tranquility. A feeling of gratitude washed over me, a deep appreciation for this carefully crafted bubble of serenity. It was the feeling of being in good hands, of being able to fully let go of any lingering anxieties about the journey. The world outside, with its unpredictability and its noise, felt a million miles away now. The finality of the transition was palpable. Stepping onto this train would be like closing a door on one world and opening another onto a space of pure, unadulterated calm. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that a deep and restful sleep awaited me somewhere on this journey. With a final, thankful nod to the attendant, I reached out my hand. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth surface of the brass handrail. It was solid and steady under my grip. I took a deep breath, the crisp night air filling my lungs for the last time. This was the moment of transition, the crossing of the threshold. I placed my foot on the first step, feeling the firm, carpeted surface beneath my shoe, a stark and welcoming contrast to the hard, cold stone of the platform I was leaving behind. It was a small step, but it felt significant, a deliberate and mindful movement into a haven of peace. Lifting myself up, I stepped into the carriage. The world outside instantly became muted, the quiet sounds of the platform fading away as if a heavy curtain had been drawn. The first and most immediate sensation was the feeling under my feet. The carpet was thick and soft, absorbing the sound of my footsteps completely, creating an atmosphere of profound and reverent silence. The air inside was warm, circulating gently, carrying that lovely, calming scent of wood and linen. The light was soft and indirect, emanating from small, shaded sconces that were spaced evenly along the length of the corridor, creating a gentle, rhythmic pattern of light and shadow that was incredibly soothing to the eyes. The corridor stretched before me, narrow and intimate. On one side, a series of closed doors, their dark polished wood gleaming softly in the low light. On the other, a row of large windows, which for now were dark mirrors, reflecting the softly lit interior of the corridor back at me, creating an illusion of a wider, more infinite space. The silence in the corridor was absolute. It was a deep, velvety quiet, the kind that feels protective, a gentle blanket wrapped around the world. Even the stationary train seemed to be holding its breath, a deep sense of peace pervading every inch of the space. There was a faint, almost subliminal vibration under the floor, the feeling of the train's latent power, its sleeping energy waiting for the signal to begin its smooth, gliding journey. My hand trailed along the wall as I began to walk, my fingertips brushing against the textured wallpaper. It was a subtle damask pattern, something that you felt more than you saw in the dim light. The sensation was pleasant, a tactile connection to my new environment. I passed the first closed door, its small polished brass number plate catching the light. I wondered about the person behind the door, already settled in their own private sanctuary, perhaps reading a book or simply gazing out at the dark platform. There was a lovely sense of shared solitude, of being alone together in this moving haven. We were a small, quiet community of travelers, each enclosed in our own world, yet all moving together through the night. A sense of profound privacy and security enveloped me. Here in this quiet corridor, I was anonymous and free. There were no demands, no expectations. The only purpose of this space was to provide comfort and facilitate a gentle journey. It was a place out of time, a liminal space between departure and arrival, and its very design encouraged a slowing down of the mind, a turning inward to a place of quiet reflection. My steps were unhurried, my movements slow and deliberate, as I savored the unique and wonderful atmosphere of the sleeping train. The world was reduced to this warm, quiet, gently humming corridor. I found the number on my ticket and stopped before the corresponding door. It looked identical to all the others, with its dark, polished wood and its small, gleaming brass number plate. The door handle was also made of brass, an old-fashioned solid lever that felt cool and substantial to the touch. Standing here before the entrance to my own private space for the night, the sense of quiet anticipation I had felt in the station hall returned, now more focused and imminent. This was the final threshold, the door to my own personal refuge. The silence around me seemed to deepen, as if the entire train were waiting with me, holding its breath for the moment of arrival. In my hand, the key felt heavy and real, its traditional shape a pleasing contrast to the flimsy electronic cards of modern hotels. It was a proper key, a piece of solid, reassuring metal. I slid it into the lock, the movement smooth and well-oiled. The sound of the key entering the lock was a small, satisfyingly solid click in the otherwise silent corridor. It felt like an ancient ritual, the act of unlocking a personal treasure chest, a secret garden. It was the promise of a space that was entirely my own, a place where I could completely and utterly unwind, a sanctuary designed for nothing more than deep, uninterrupted rest. Holding my breath for just a second, I turned the key. The mechanism inside the lock turned with a low, beautifully mechanical sound, a soft and satisfying thunk as the bolt slid back. It was a sound that spoke of good craftsmanship, of solidity and security. I paused for a moment longer, my hand resting on the door handle, savoring this final moment of anticipation. Then gently I pushed the door inward. It swung open without a sound, its hinges perfectly silent, revealing the warm, welcoming sanctuary that lay beyond. The first thing I saw was the light. A small, elegant lamp on a little wooden table was switched on, casting a soft, golden glow throughout the cabin. The air that flowed out to greet me was warm and carried that same faint scent of lavender and clean linen that I had noticed at the carriage door. My eyes took in the scene before me, a beautifully made bed with crisp white linen sheets and a thick, soft-looking blanket turned down invitingly. A small, perfectly clear window was framed by the same rich burgundy velvet curtains I had seen from the platform. It was a perfect picture of comfort and peace. I stood there on the threshold, not yet stepping inside, simply absorbing the profound sense of welcome, the feeling of having truly finally arrived. I stepped across the threshold, my foot sinking into the plush deep pile of the carpet, and the world seemed to shift on its axis. The air inside the cabin was a tangible presence, a warm, still pool that enveloped me instantly, carrying that gentle, calming fragrance of something clean and something soothing, like freshly ironed linen and a hint of dried flowers pressed between the pages of an old book. My body, which had been braced against the cool air of the platform and the corridor, immediately began to uncoil, my muscles softening in response to this profound and gentle warmth. The light from the small lamp on the table was even softer from this vantage point, a diffuse golden glow that painted the small space in shades of honey and amber. It was a light that did not demand attention, but instead offered comfort, a quiet illumination that seemed to understand the needs of a weary traveler. The compact perfection of the room was even more apparent now. Every object had its place, every line was clean and purposeful, creating an atmosphere of serene orderliness. It was not a space that felt small, but rather one that felt intimate, a perfectly constructed cocoon designed for a single occupant. The silence within the cabin was of a different quality than the silence in the corridor. Out there, it had been a shared public quiet. Here, with the door still open, it was a silence that was poised, waiting for completion. I could feel the faint ambient sounds of the train's resting state, the low, almost subaudible hum of its potential energy, but it felt distant, on the other side of an invisible barrier. The world was still connected to me by this open doorway, a rectangular slice of the softly lit corridor. My gaze was drawn to the door itself, this final barrier between my own personal world and the one outside. It was a beautiful object, crafted from a dark, heavy wood with a rich, deep grain that swirled in intricate patterns, like smoke captured and frozen in time. The brass handle, which I had just turned, gleamed with a soft, buttery light, its surface smooth and cool from my recent touch. It felt ancient and reliable, a piece of honest, solid craftsmanship. The thought of closing it, of completing the seal, was an incredibly alluring one. It was the final step in the ritual of arrival, the definitive act of creating my own private sanctuary. The desire for that final, perfect solitude was a gentle but insistent pull. I wanted to hear the sound it would make, to feel the subtle shift in the air pressure, to know that I was completely and utterly alone in this warm, safe space. It was a desire not for isolation, but for a profound and restorative privacy, a chance to be entirely with my own thoughts, unobserved and unburdened. This tiny, perfect room was a world unto itself, and I was about to become its sole inhabitant. It was a deeply comforting thought, a promise of uninterrupted peace. My hand, as if with a will of its own, reached out. My fingers curled around the smooth, solid brass of the inside handle. It felt heavy in my palm, a satisfying weight. I took a small, almost imperceptible breath, a final intake of the shared air of the corridor before I claimed this small pocket of the world as my own. With a slow, deliberate movement, I pulled the door towards me. It did not swing quickly, but moved with a smooth, expensive-feeling resistance, its sheer weight evident in the grace of its motion. The rectangle of light from the corridor narrowed, the patterns of the wallpaper opposite me sliding out of view, until all that was left was a final, brilliant sliver of light at the edge. Then, with a deep and resonant thump, the heavy wood of the door met the solid frame. The sound was not loud, but it was profound, a bass note that seemed to vibrate in my bones for a fleeting moment. It was the sound of security, the sound of a safe harbor. It was immediately followed by a secondary sound, a sharp and beautifully mechanical click as the latch slid home, its brass tongue finding its brass resting place with perfect precision. The finality of that sound was absolute. It was a full stop at the end of a long sentence, a period placed on the day and on the world outside. And in the wake of that click, a new and even deeper silence descended, a silence that was now entirely my own. The air in the room felt instantly different, thicker, warmer, more personal. The sounds of the train, faint as they had been, were now muted even further, becoming a gentle, almost imperceptible murmur that was more a feeling than a sound. My own breathing seemed to become a part of the room's quiet symphony. A wave of pure, unadulterated peace washed over me, a feeling of being completely and perfectly sealed away from everything else. I was in my cocoon now, my nest, my shell. The world could continue on its way with all its noise and its haste, but it could not touch me in here. Here in this warm golden light, surrounded by dark wood and soft fabrics, I was untouchable. Here I was free to simply be. With the door now closed and the sanctuary sealed, my first conscious action was to release the gentle, persistent weight I had been carrying on my shoulder. My travel bag, which had felt so light at the beginning of the day, now seemed to hold the accumulated weariness of the entire journey. I turned to the small, built-in luggage rack, a simple but elegant construction of the same dark wood as the door, with sturdy straps of thick leather stretched across its frame. It was another example of the cabin's thoughtful and efficient design, a perfect place for its intended purpose. I swung the bag from my shoulder, my muscles sighing in relief as the pressure from the strap vanished. I held it for a moment, suspended in the air before lowering it gently onto the rack. It landed with a soft, muffled thud, the sound absorbed by the leather straps and the thick fabric of the bag itself. It was a quiet, contained sound, but it felt deeply significant. It was the sound of a burden being set down, both literally and metaphorically. The bag, with its contents representing my connection to the world I had left behind, was now at rest. It was separate from me. I no longer needed to carry it. The simple act of placing it on the rack felt like a definitive moment of transition, a physical release that mirrored the mental release I was beginning to feel. I looked at the bag for a moment, sitting there neatly in its designated spot. It looked content, as if it too were grateful to have arrived. Now it was time to shed the final layers of that outside world from my own person. My coat, a long, heavy garment that had been my shield against the evening's chill, felt suddenly cumbersome and foreign in the gentle warmth of the cabin. I unfastened the large buttons one by one, the slow, deliberate movements feeling like another small ritual. The coat parted, and I shrugged it from my shoulders. The sheer weight of it as I held it in my hands was surprising. It was a heavy, protective skin that I no longer needed. I folded it carefully, the thick wool fabric soft and familiar beneath my fingers, and laid it gently next to my bag. It carried a faint, lingering scent of the cool night air, a final fading ghost of the world outside, which I knew would soon dissipate completely in the warmth of the room. Next were my shoes. They had carried me through the city, across the stone floor of the great station hall and along the gravelled platform. They felt solid and restrictive now, anchors tying me to the memory of walking, of being in motion. I sat on the edge of the beautifully made bed, the mattress firm yet yielding beneath me. I leaned down and slowly, mindfully, untied the laces of the first shoe, pulling the woven threads through the eyelets until they were loose. I slipped my foot out, and the feeling of liberation was immediate and wonderful. My sock-clad foot sank into the deep, soft carpet, the texture a delightful, gentle caress. I repeated the process with the other shoe, a mirror image of the first, until both feet were free. I placed the shoes neatly on the floor side by side, their journey over for the day. To be without my coat and shoes in this small private space felt like a profound statement of arrival. I was no longer a traveler in transit. I had reached my destination for the night. I was home. My gaze, now free to wander and explore, fell upon the rich burgundy curtains that framed the window. The color was deep and luxurious, like a fine vintage wine. In the soft lamplight, the velvet fabric seemed to have an inner life, its deep pile absorbing the light in some places and reflecting it with a soft sheen in others. I reached out a hand, my fingers drawn to the texture. As my fingertips made contact, a soft sigh of pleasure escaped my lips. The velvet was impossibly soft, thick and plush, its surface a pure, tactile delight. I ran my hand down the length of the curtain, feeling its substantial weight, its gentle, yielding surface. It was a fabric that spoke of warmth, of comfort, of old-world elegance. It was a curtain designed not just to block out the light, but to create a sense of theater and enclosure, to add another layer of richness to the sanctuary. From the deep, warm softness of the curtain, my hand moved to the bed. The contrast in texture was immediate and striking. My fingers brushed against the edge of the turned-down sheet, and the linen was crisp and cool to the touch. It was a clean, refreshing coolness, like the other side of a pillow. I ran my palm over the surface, feeling the fine, tight weave of the high-quality fabric. It was smooth, almost silky, yet it possessed the unmistakable, honest texture of natural linen. The sheet was pulled taut over the mattress, its surface a perfect, unbroken plane of pristine white, its edge folded back with a geometric precision that was deeply satisfying to the eye. It was an invitation, a clear and unambiguous promise of deep, restorative sleep. The combination of the warm, heavy velvet of the curtains and the cool, crisp linen of the bed was a masterclass in sensory comfort. The final act of transformation was to change out of the clothes I had worn all day. They were the last vestige of my public self, the uniform of my journey. I retrieved my nightclothes from my bag, the soft folded bundle feeling like a precious treasure in my hands. I unfolded them, the familiar, soft cotton fabric a welcome sight. There was a faint, clean scent to them, the scent of my own home, a comforting and personal aroma that made this small, unfamiliar space feel instantly more my own. I slowly undressed, my day clothes feeling slightly rough and restrictive in comparison to the promise of the soft fabric I held. As I pulled the loose, comfortable nightshirt over my head, the feeling was one of pure, unadulterated bliss. The soft cotton slid over my skin, a gentle, weightless caress. It did not cling or bind in any way, but hung loosely, allowing the air to circulate, allowing my skin to breathe. The transition was complete. I was no longer a traveler wearing the clothes of the outside world. I was a person at rest, dressed for sleep, for peace, for quiet contemplation. This simple change of clothing was the most profound transition of all, a definitive signal to my body and my mind that the day was officially over. There were no more tasks to complete, no more places to be. My only purpose now was to inhabit this peaceful space, to allow the gentle rhythm of the train to soothe me, and to eventually surrender to sleep. Standing there in the middle of the small cabin, bathed in the soft golden light, clad in the softest of fabrics, I felt a sense of contentment so deep and so pure that it was almost overwhelming. Every step of my arrival, from closing the door to this final, gentle act of self-care, had been a deliberate movement towards this perfect moment of peace. I shifted my weight and settled properly onto the edge of the bed, my feet now resting flat on the floor, the thick carpet a soft, reassuring presence beneath them. The mattress accepted my weight with a sigh that was felt rather than heard, a perfect yielding response that was neither too soft nor too firm. It was the kind of support that felt engineered for pure comfort, a foundation of rest that held me with a gentle, confident strength. From this new, lower vantage point, the cabin transformed. The ceiling seemed to float higher above me, giving the small space a surprising sense of verticality. The window, now at eye level, became less of a picture and more of a portal, a dark, polished frame around the deep, impenetrable black of the night outside. The room felt even more like a self-contained world, its dimensions intimate and its purpose clear. It was a space designed for one, a sanctuary where every element was within arm's reach, a place where the world was edited down to its most comfortable and essential components. My gaze drifted across the small, perfect landscape of the cabin. The rich, dark wood that paneled the lower half of the walls seemed to glow with a deep internal warmth under the lamplight. It was a color that seemed to absorb and soften sound, contributing to the profound sense of peace. The upper walls were covered in a subtly textured paper, a pale cream that caught the light and gave it back to the room with a soft, gentle diffusion. Everything was clean. Everything was ordered. The folded edge of the linen sheet on the bed was a crisp white line against the deep burgundy of the blanket, folded at its foot. The brass of the door handle and the luggage rack echoed the brass of the reading lamp, creating a quiet, harmonious visual language. From this seated position, I was no longer an observer looking into a scene. I was a part of it, a figure seated within the composition, fully integrated into the tranquility of the refuge. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible scent in the air that I hadn't noticed while standing. It was the faintest aroma of polished wood and old, well-cared-for things, a scent of history and quality. It was not the artificial smell of a modern hotel room, but the genuine, honest fragrance of real materials that had been tended to with care for many years. It spoke of countless journeys, of other quiet travelers who had found solace in this very space. It was a comforting thought to be a small part of this long, quiet history. I felt a sense of connection to those unseen, unknown passengers of the past, a shared understanding of the need for such a peaceful retreat from the world. The cabin was not just a room, it was a vessel holding the accumulated peace of all who had rested here before me. A feeling of deep, unhurried calm began to settle into my very bones. The urgency of the day, the subtle pressures of travel, all of that had been left on the other side of the cabin door. Here, there was no clock on the wall demanding my attention, no screen flashing with notifications. Time itself seemed to have slowed its pace, stretching out into a long, luxurious ribbon of quiet moments. My breathing was slow and even, my heartbeat a steady, gentle rhythm in my chest. I had a sudden, clear thought that I had nothing at all that I needed to do. There was no agenda, no task list. The journey itself was the destination, and its only requirement was that I be still, that I allow myself to be carried, that I simply exist within this peaceful moment. This profound sense of stillness reminded me of visiting a very old library in the middle of a weekday afternoon. The air is thick with the quiet hum of concentrated thought, the light is soft, and the scent of old paper and binding glue is a comforting perfume. In such a place one feels compelled to move slowly, to breathe quietly, to respect the sacredness of the silence. This cabin was a library of one, a repository of quiet, and I was its sole respectful patron. The only story I needed to read was the one being written by the soft light on the wooden walls and the feeling of the plush carpet under my feet. It was a story without words, told entirely through sensation and atmosphere. The intention that formed in my mind was simple and pure: to explore this small world not with my feet, but with my senses. I would take the time to truly see, to truly feel the details of my temporary home. It was an act of mindfulness, a deliberate choice to appreciate the craftsmanship and the thought that had gone into creating such a perfect, enveloping space. There was no need to rush towards sleep. The true rest had already begun, here in this quiet, seated contemplation. The journey was not just through the sleeping countryside, but into a deeper state of tranquility, and this cabin was the perfect vehicle for that inward passage. I took a slow, deep breath, and as I exhaled, I felt the last knot of tension in my shoulders finally release and dissolve into nothingness. My posture softened, my body sinking another fraction of an inch into the supportive mattress. I consciously let my hands rest, palms down, on the cool, crisp linen of the bed beside me, feeling the fine, smooth texture against my skin. My gaze, soft and unfocused, rested on the wooden frame of the window, the starting point of my sensory exploration. I was ready to simply be here, to absorb the quiet beauty of my surroundings. My hand lifted from the bed, and my fingers reached out towards the window frame. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if I were about to touch a priceless work of art. My fingertips made contact with the wood. It was cool to the touch, a deep, solid coolness that spoke of its density and age. The surface was incredibly smooth, polished by time and care to a finish that felt more like silk than wood. There was no grain that could be felt, only a perfect, flowing smoothness. I let my fingers trail along the bottom edge of the frame, a slow, exploratory caress. The precision of the joinery was remarkable. Where the vertical and horizontal pieces met, the seam was almost imperceptible, a testament to a level of craftsmanship that was a rarity in the modern world. My eyes followed the path of my fingers, and I began to truly see the wood, not just as a dark frame, but as a landscape in its own right. The grain was a mesmerizing pattern of deep, dark rivers flowing through hills of a slightly warmer, honeyed brown. In one spot, a small circular knot formed a perfect swirling galaxy, a tiny, frozen eddy in the slow, ancient current of the wood's growth. The lamplight played upon the polished surface, creating a long, soft highlight that moved as I shifted my perspective, a gentle, liquid gleam. It was a material that felt alive, that held within it the story of the tree it had once been, a story of long, slow years of patient growth, of seasons turning, of standing silent and strong in a distant forest. From the window frame, my hand moved to the small built-in nightstand that was a seamless extension of the wall's wooden paneling. Here, too, the surface was smooth and cool, a perfect dark mirror reflecting a distorted golden image of the reading lamp that sat upon it. I traced the edge of the nightstand, my finger following the gentle, rounded curve that had been carved to soften the corner. It was a small detail, an unnecessary but beautiful touch that spoke of a deep consideration for both aesthetics and comfort. There were no sharp edges in this room, nothing to jar the senses. Everything was designed to be soft, to be gentle, to be soothing. This was not just furniture, it was a carefully composed element in a symphony of tranquility. My gaze traveled up from the nightstand to the source of the golden light, the small brass reading lamp. It was a thing of simple, timeless elegance. Its base was a solid, circular piece of brass, securely mounted to the wooden wall. A slender, curved arm arched gracefully, holding the small, bell-shaped shade. The brass itself was not polished to a brilliant, garish shine, but instead possessed a deep, soft patina that only comes with age. It glowed with a quiet, confident warmth, as if it were lit from within. A small, elegant toggle switch, also made of brass, protruded from the base, a simple mechanical control that felt infinitely more satisfying than any modern touch sensor. The lampshade was a pale, creamy color, perhaps made of parchment or a fine, tightly woven linen. It was translucent enough to allow a soft, ambient glow to pass through it, preventing the light from being too harsh or creating stark shadows. Yet, its primary function was to direct the light downwards, and this it did perfectly. It cast a focused, circular pool of warm, gentle light directly onto the head of the bed, illuminating the two plump white pillows that were propped against the headboard. The light revealed the subtle texture in the fabric of the pillowcases, the tiny, woven squares of the cotton, and made the pristine white seem even purer, even more inviting. It was a light designed for one purpose: to allow a reader to lose themselves in a book without straining their eyes, to create a small private world of words and imagination. I leaned forward slightly, bringing my hand close to the shade, and I could feel a gentle, pleasant warmth radiating from it. It was a clean, dry heat, the byproduct of its quiet work of illumination. The lamp felt like a faithful, silent companion, a small personal sun that would keep the darkness at bay for as long as I wished. Its steady, unwavering light was a comforting presence, a beacon of calm in the quiet room. It was another element that felt perfectly chosen, perfectly placed, another note in the harmonious composition of the cabin. It was a promise of a quiet activity, of a slow, peaceful way to pass the time before sleep finally claimed me. With a soft sigh of contentment, I finally let my body relax completely. I leaned back, shifting my weight from the edge of the bed to the support of the headboard. The pillows received me with a soft, rustling whisper, their downy filling compressing and conforming perfectly to the shape of my head and neck. The support was immediate and absolute, a feeling of being cradled, of being held securely. I let my head rest fully, the cool, crisp cotton of the pillowcase a soothing sensation against my skin. My hands came to rest in my lap, my legs stretched out before me on the bed. In this position I felt utterly and completely at ease. as if I had been poured into the space and had found my perfect form. My eyelids felt heavy, and I allowed them to drift closed. The golden light of the cabin vanished, replaced by a soft, warm darkness behind my eyelids. And as the world of sight receded, the world of sound and feeling came forward, magnified and clarified. The first thing I became aware of was the silence. It was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It was a silence so deep and so profound that it felt like a physical substance, a thick, soft blanket that enveloped me, insulating me from the world. It was a silence that had weight and texture, a velvet stillness that pressed gently on my eardrums, erasing the echoes of the day's noise. It was the most peaceful sound I had ever heard, and within that deep, profound silence, there was another sound, or rather a feeling. It was the hum of the train. It was not a noise that I heard with my ears in the conventional sense. It was a low, resonant frequency that I felt through the headboard, through the pillows, through the mattress beneath me. It was a subtle, pervasive vibration, a thrum that was the gentle, sleeping heartbeat of the great machine. It was the sound of latent power, of potential energy held in a state of perfect, patient readiness. It was the most soothing, most hypnotic sensation imaginable. It was a promise of motion, a lullaby sung in a key so low it was almost beyond the range of hearing. I focused on it, letting it fill my awareness. The vibration was steady, constant, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to sync with my own slowing heartbeat, drawing me deeper and deeper into a state of absolute tranquility. My thoughts, which had been gently drifting, began to dissolve, washed away by the deep, silent river of the cabin's quiet and the steady, resonant hum of the journey that was about to begin. I was here. I was at peace. I was ready. Resting there, suspended in the warm, quiet amber of the cabin, my body was a vessel of pure tranquility, anchored to the gentle, rhythmic hum of the waiting train. The world behind my closed eyelids was a soft, dark velvet, a peaceful void where thoughts moved not as sharp, distinct words, but as slow, meandering currents of feeling. I was floating in a sea of deep, profound peace, a state of being so complete that it felt as if I had dissolved into the very silence of the room, my own consciousness a quiet, warm ember at the center of the stillness. The gentle, pervasive vibration from the train's sleeping engine was a lullaby that had seeped into my bones, a steady, resonant pulse that calmed my own heartbeat into a slow, languorous rhythm. It was a state of rest so deep it bordered on the edge of sleep itself, a perfect weightless suspension between waking and dreaming. Into this serene inner landscape, a new thought began to form, not as an intrusion, but as a delicate, natural blossoming. It started as a feeling, a subtle and pleasant sensation of warmth imagined in my hands, a gentle heat radiating through my palms. Then came a scent, imagined but so vivid it was almost real. The rich, dark, slightly sweet aroma of melting chocolate, a fragrance that spoke of comfort, of indulgence, of quiet, solitary treats on cold winter nights. It was a scent that carried no complex demands, only a simple, pure promise of pleasure. It did not disrupt the silence of my mind, but rather it deepened it, adding a new layer of sensory richness to the quiet contemplation. My mind's eye, unbidden, conjured a perfect image, a simple, elegant cup made of white porcelain, its surface smooth and flawless, resting on a matching saucer. It was the kind of cup that feels substantial and comforting in your hands, and within it, a dark, velvety liquid, almost black in its richness, its surface steaming with a delicate, swirling mist that rose in a slow, hypnotic dance. The steam caught an imagined light, twisting and unfurling like a silken ribbon before vanishing into the air. The image was so clear, so perfectly formed, that I could almost feel the weight of the cup, the warmth of the porcelain against my fingertips, the way the smooth, curved lip would feel against my own. It was a vision of simple, unadulterated comfort. A wave of pure, uncomplicated contentment washed over me at the thought. The idea of a hot chocolate was not just a passing whim. It felt like the perfect, final brushstroke on the masterpiece of the evening. It was the one element that could make this profound sense of peace even more complete. It was a small act of self-care, a gentle ritual to mark the transition from the quiet of arrival to the even deeper quiet of impending sleep. The thought was not a craving, not a restless desire, but a serene and fitting conclusion. It felt like the natural, inevitable next step in this slow, gentle unfolding of the night, a quiet and private celebration of this perfect solitude. The imagined warmth of the cup in my hands connected to a deep well of memory, a chain of association that reached back into the quietest, most comfortable corners of my past. It was the feeling of being a child, wrapped in a thick blanket after playing in the snow, my small hands wrapped around a mug almost too big for them to hold. It was the memory of sitting in a quiet corner of a beloved old bookshop cafe, the world outside blurred by rain on the window pane, the only sounds the rustle of turning pages and the soft clink of a spoon against ceramic. It was a thread of warmth and comfort that ran through my life, a simple, reliable pleasure that had always signified safety, peace, and a moment of quiet respite. And so the gentle thought solidified into a quiet, unhurried intention. I would make the short journey to the dining car. The idea of the walk itself was appealing, a chance to see more of this beautiful, sleeping train, to move through its quiet, softly lit corridors. It would be a small adventure, a brief pilgrimage in search of this simple, comforting elixir. The decision was made without any sense of urgency or effort. It was a natural culmination of the peaceful state I was in, an action that would flow from it, not disrupt it. I would go, and then I would return to this sanctuary, cup in hand, to savor the final, perfect moments of the waking night before letting the train rock me to sleep. The first physical manifestation of this new intention was a subtle shift in my breathing. I took a slow, conscious breath, deeper than the ones before it, filling my lungs with the warm, still air of the cabin. As I exhaled, a soft sigh escaped my lips, a sound of pure contentment. My body, which had been in a state of almost complete surrender, began to slowly gather its gentle energy. It was not a call to action, but a quiet awakening, a gentle stirring in preparation for a slow, mindful movement. My hands, which had been resting limply in my lap, seemed to regain a sense of purpose, my fingers curling and uncurling in a slow, soft motion. Then, with a slowness that felt luxurious, I allowed my eyelids to drift open. The movement was unforced, a gentle parting of the curtains. The first thing I saw was the soft, golden light of the cabin, which seemed to have grown even warmer, even more welcoming in the time my eyes had been closed. It did not glare or startle me, but instead it washed over my vision like a gentle tide, a soft reintroduction to the beautiful, tangible world of my small refuge. The crisp white of the pillows, the deep burgundy of the blanket, the dark, swirling grain of the wood, it all came back into focus, a perfect, still life of tranquility. My perception of the room, now re-engaged, felt sharper, more appreciative. I was no longer just a passive occupant. I was an actor, albeit one in a very slow and quiet play. I took another slow, calming breath, and with the exhale I put my intention into motion. I engaged my muscles gently, pushing myself up from the deep comfort of the pillows. My body moved as a single fluid unit, swinging my legs over the side of the bed. The movement was silent, save for the soft rustle of my nightclothes and the faint whisper of the linen sheets. My feet found the floor, sinking once more into the deep, welcoming pile of the carpet. I sat there for a moment on the edge of the bed, in that same position I had taken when I first arrived, a position of gentle readiness. The brief, meditative state of repose now transformed into a quiet, serene sense of purpose. My travel bag was resting where I had left it, a silent, patient companion. I reached for it, the zipper making a soft metallic hiss as I drew it open, a small, sharp sound in the profound quiet. Inside, my few belongings were neatly arranged. My fingers found what I was looking for, a cardigan knitted from a soft, thick wool, its texture warm and slightly rustic. I lifted it out, its familiar weight a comfort in my hands. The color was a deep, heather gray, a perfect, gentle neutral that seemed to belong in this calm, understated environment. Holding it felt like holding a piece of home, another small anchor to my own personal sense of comfort. I shrugged the cardigan on over my nightshirt. The wool was soft and warm against my arms, an immediate and welcome embrace. It was like adding another layer of coziness, a soft, protective shell for my short journey. The sleeves were long, and I let them cover my hands for a moment, the warmth seeping into my fingers. The act of putting it on was another small, comforting ritual, a quiet preparation that was part of the pleasure of the experience. It was a gesture that said I was not in a hurry, that even this small moment of preparation was something to be savored. Then I leaned down and slipped my feet back into my shoes. I did not bother with the laces, leaving them loose, simply sliding my feet into the familiar shapes. The shoes felt different now, no longer a restrictive necessity for walking in the outside world, but simply a soft, protective covering for my feet, a practical measure for walking through the train. They were a part of my indoor world now, their purpose transformed. Dressed in my soft nightclothes and this warm, encompassing cardigan, I felt ready. I stood up from the bed, my movements still slow and deliberate. The cabin, from a standing position, once again felt like my own small, perfect kingdom. Before leaving, before even reaching for the door, I paused. My hand hovered just above the cool brass of the handle, and I took a moment to simply look, to absorb the scene one more time. The cabin was a perfect portrait of tranquility. The single lamp cast its warm golden circle of light, leaving the corners of the room in soft, gentle shadow. The bed, with the impression of my body still faintly visible on the pillows and the turned-down sheet, looked impossibly inviting, a promise of the deep comfort that awaited my return. My coat and bag sat neatly on the rack, everything in its place, an image of serene and uncluttered order. My gaze lingered on the pillow, on the subtle indentation where my head had rested just a few moments before. It was a small, ephemeral sign of my presence, a temporary mark on this beautiful, timeless space. In that small detail, the cabin ceased to be an anonymous room on a train and became something more personal. It was my room, my refuge, my sanctuary. A profound sense of gratitude and affection for this small space welled up inside me. It had welcomed me so completely, offering a level of peace and security that was a rare and precious gift. It felt like a friend, a silent, steadfast guardian that would keep watch over my belongings and my peace while I was away. This feeling of a safe haven, of a space that was entirely mine, resonated with a deep, primal comfort. It was the feeling of a childhood bedroom, a place where the world could be shut out, where I was safe and protected. It was the feeling of a secret hiding place, a small den built from blankets and chairs, a tiny world of my own creation. This cabin, in its elegant and thoughtful design, had managed to capture that same essential, childlike feeling of perfect safety and belonging. It was a space that not only sheltered the body, but also soothed the soul, a place where one could be utterly and completely oneself. A soft smile touched my lips. The brief journey for a cup of hot chocolate was no longer just about the drink itself. It was now framed by the promise of this return. The pleasure would be twofold, the journey and the destination, and then the even more satisfying journey back to this perfect waiting peace. The anticipation I felt was a gentle, pleasant warmth in my chest, a quiet excitement that was entirely free of anxiety or impatience. It was the simple, pure joy of looking forward to a small, perfect pleasure. I would go, I would fetch my warm drink, and then I would come back here to my sanctuary, and the circle of the evening would be complete. My hand finally came to rest on the solid, cool brass of the door handle. I took one last, slow breath of the cabin's warm, still air, committing the sight of the room to memory. Then, with a gentle, deliberate motion, I turned the handle. The latch clicked softly, a small mechanical sound that broke the deep silence. I pulled the heavy door inward, opening it just enough to slip through. The seal was broken, and a new atmosphere, the slightly cooler air and the even deeper, more vast silence of the corridor, whispered at the edge of my awareness. I stepped through the doorway, pulling the door gently closed behind me, though not latching it, ready for my quiet journey, and already looking forward to my return. As I stepped out of the cabin, pulling the heavy door almost closed behind me, a new sensation made itself known, a feeling so subtle and so profound that it took a moment to fully register. The train was moving. It was not a lurch or a jolt, but a smooth, almost imperceptible shift from perfect stillness to gentle, gliding motion. It felt as if the world itself had decided to slide away beneath my feet, as if the entire carriage were a boat that had just been released from its moorings to drift on a slow, silent river. A deep, resonant hum, which had been a mere vibration before, now resolved itself into a complex and beautiful music, the song of the journey. The most prominent sound was the rhythmic, hypnotic beat of the wheels on the tracks, a steady and reassuring clack, 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 clack that was the very heartbeat of the train, a gentle percussion that seemed to measure the passage not of time, but of distance and tranquility. The corridor, which had been a static, silent space, was now alive with this new, gentle energy. The soft light from the wall sconces seemed to breathe. The pools of golden illumination on the opposite wall, subtly elongating and then contracting in time with the gentle side-to-side sway of the carriage. My reflection in the dark windows was no longer still, but now a ghostly companion, swaying in perfect rhythm with me as we glided together through the impenetrable darkness outside. I placed a hand on the wall to steady myself, not from a lack of balance, but as a way to connect more deeply with the motion. The textured wallpaper was a constant, solid presence, but beneath my palm, I could feel the lifeblood of the train, the deep, steady vibration of its powerful engines, pulling us smoothly and confidently into the sleeping world. My body, unbidden, began to adapt to the gentle rocking rhythm, a cradle-like motion that was deeply, instinctually soothing. Walking down the narrow corridor was a different experience now. I moved with the train, my steps naturally falling into sync with its gentle, swaying dance. I passed the other closed doors, each one a silent testament to the other solitary travelers on their own quiet journeys, each of them now being gently rocked, just as I was. The thought filled me with a sense of peaceful kinship, a shared experience of being carried through the night. The air in the corridor seemed to circulate with a new purpose, a soft current that whispered past my ears. The silence was no longer absolute, but was now filled with this gentle mechanical lullaby, a sound that did not intrude upon the peace, but rather became its very essence. It was the sound of progress without hurry, of movement without effort. It was the sound of complete surrender to the journey itself. At the end of the carriage, I came to the connecting door, a heavier, more functional-looking door with a small circular window of thick glass. I placed my hand on the cool metal plate and pushed. It opened onto a small, transitional space, a rubberized concertina-like tunnel that connected our carriage to the next. For a brief moment, the sound of the wheels was louder, more raw, the air cooler. I stepped across the shifting metal plates of the floor, a momentary and thrilling connection to the raw mechanics of the train before reaching the door to the next carriage. Pushing this one open, I stepped through, and the atmosphere changed so completely, so dramatically, that I felt as if I had walked not into another part of the train, but into another world entirely. I was standing at the entrance to the dining car, and it was a space of vast and breathtaking emptiness. It was a long, wide carriage, far more open than the intimate, partitioned corridor of the sleeping car, and it was dark, but not with an oppressive or unwelcoming blackness. It was a deep, soft, indigo darkness, the color of the sky just after the last trace of twilight has vanished. The only illumination came from the immense panoramic windows that ran the entire length of the car. Through them, a brilliant full moon poured its light, a silent silver flood that washed over the entire space, transforming it into a scene from a dream. The world outside was a fast-moving blur of darkened hills and sleeping fields, but the moonlight itself was a constant, serene presence. The moonlight performed a quiet magic within the car. It caught the edges of the dozens of empty tables, each one draped in a pristine white tablecloth. These squares of linen did not look merely white. They glowed with a soft, ethereal, silver-blue light, as if they were lit from within. They were like floating islands of faint light on a dark, still sea. Upon each table, the faint, sharp glint of polished silverware and the delicate, curved silhouette of an empty wineglass created a landscape of ghostly elegance. The chairs, neatly tucked in, were dark, silent sentinels, waiting for diners who would not arrive until the morning. To be the only person in this vast, beautiful, silent space felt like a rare and precious privilege. The emptiness was not lonely. It was serene, a grand, cathedral-like silence that invited reverence and awe. The rhythmic sound of the wheels was different here, deeper and more resonant, the acoustics of the large, open car giving it a grander, more sonorous quality. My gaze traveled down the length of the car, past the rows of glowing, moonlit tables to the very far end. There, a single stark contrast to the cool silver-blue magic of the moonlight, was a small contained pool of warm, golden light. It was a beacon, an island of warmth and life in the beautiful, silent expanse. It emanated from a small service counter, and as my eyes adjusted, I could see the silhouette of a person standing behind it, quietly attending to some small, unseen task. A feeling of gentle purpose returned to me, and I began to walk, my feet sinking into a thick carpet that swallowed the sound of my footsteps, allowing me to move through the cavernous space like a ghost myself. As I drew closer, the details of the warm little scene came into focus. The counter was made of a dark, polished wood, and the light came from a single downward-casting lamp, illuminating a small, clean workspace. The figure behind the counter looked up as I approached. It was a woman, the train's attendant, dressed in the same crisp, dark uniform as the person who had welcomed me aboard. She looked up not with a start, but with a slow, calm recognition, as if she had been expecting a visitor to her quiet, nocturnal domain. Her face was gentle, and as I came to a halt before the counter, a soft, genuine smile touched her lips. It was not a broad, professional smile, but a small, intimate one, a gesture of quiet understanding that seemed to acknowledge the special, shared peace of this late hour. There was no need for words. Her smile was a question and a welcome all in one, a silent offering of service and companionship in the quiet of the night. I found myself returning the smile, a silent communication passing between the two of us, the only two waking souls in this beautiful, rolling world. I made my simple, quiet request, my voice sounding low and soft in the vast, empty space. The attendant simply nodded, her smile of understanding deepening slightly. And then her hands began to move, and I found myself utterly captivated by the slow, deliberate, and beautiful ritual she performed. Her movements were economical and graceful, each gesture imbued with a sense of purpose and care. First, she took a white porcelain cup and a matching saucer from a neat stack beneath the counter, placing them on the polished wooden surface with a soft, barely audible clink. The cup was pristine, its clean, curved lines a perfect vessel for the comfort that was to come. Her fingers then moved to a small, gleaming refrigerator, from which she produced a bottle of milk, its sides beaded with condensation. She took a small pitcher, made of a bright, polished silver that caught the golden light in a brilliant, liquid highlight. She uncapped the bottle and poured the milk, and the sound was a quiet, private pleasure, a low, thick glug, 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 as the cold, white liquid filled the silver vessel. Next, her hands moved to a simple, dark canister. As she lifted the lid, a faint but wonderfully rich aroma drifted across the counter, the deep, dark, slightly bitter scent of pure, unsweetened chocolate. She took a small, long-handled spoon and dipped it into the dark powder, bringing out a perfect heaping measure, which she then gently tipped into the bottom of the empty white cup. The contrast was beautiful, the pile of dark umber powder resting in the bottom of the pristine white porcelain cavern. Now came the most captivating part of the ritual. She moved the silver pitcher of milk to the side of a large chrome machine, positioning the spout of the steam wand just below the surface of the white liquid. With a deft flick of a lever, the machine came to life. There was an initial, sharp hiss, a sudden and powerful release of steam that quickly softened into a rhythmic, frothing sigh. I watched, mesmerized, as the surface of the milk began to churn and swirl. A vortex formed in the center of the pitcher, the liquid rising, folding in on itself, transforming from a flat, still fluid into a thick, billowing cloud of impossibly small, perfect bubbles. The attendant's hand rested on the side of the silver pitcher, feeling its temperature, her focus absolute. The gentle, hissing sound was the only music in the car, apart from the constant rhythm of the wheels, and the warm, sweet smell of heated milk began to join the dark scent of the chocolate. When the milk had reached the perfect state, she turned the lever, and the hissing stopped as abruptly as it had begun. The silence that rushed back in felt even deeper than before. She gave the pitcher one last gentle swirl, her wrist moving in a slow, elegant circle. Then, lifting the pitcher, she brought its spout to the lip of the porcelain cup. With an incredibly steady hand, she began to pour. The hot, frothed milk streamed out in a thick white ribbon, hitting the dark powder at the bottom. For a moment, the two elements resisted each other, and then they began to meld, the white and the dark swirling together in beautiful, creamy eddies, a slow, graceful dance that transformed them into a single, uniform color of rich, warm, liquid velvet. She poured until the cup was full, a perfect smooth surface of creamy brown topped with a small, delicate cap of pure white foam. The ritual was complete. With a final, graceful movement, she placed the full cup onto its saucer. Then, with both hands, she gently slid it across the polished wooden counter towards me. The cup and saucer glided over the smooth surface, a small white ship coming to rest in its harbor. It stopped just before my own waiting hands. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, savoring this final moment of anticipation before reaching out. My fingers, which had grown cool in the air of the large car, wrapped around the sides of the porcelain cup. The warmth was immediate and profound. It was not a searing heat, but a deep, steady, life-giving warmth that seemed to sink directly into my skin, through my palms, and into my very bones. I closed my hands completely around it, a gesture of pure, grateful acceptance. The simple, tangible heat was an anchor, a physical manifestation of all the comfort and peace I had been seeking. Holding this perfect warm cup in my hands, in the middle of this vast, empty, moonlit dining car, I felt a sense of contentment so pure and so complete that it felt like a quiet, perfect joy. I gave the attendant a final, soft nod of thanks, a silent expression of gratitude for her part in this quiet ritual, and she responded with another small, gentle smile. Then, holding the warm, precious cup carefully with both hands, I turned away from the small island of golden light and back towards the vast, silvered expanse of the empty dining car. The walk back felt different. Before, I had been a traveler on a small quest, moving with a quiet purpose towards a destination. Now I was carrying the prize, a small portable vessel of warmth and comfort, and my only purpose was to find the perfect place to savor it. The train continued its steady, rhythmic dance, the gentle swaying, a constant, reassuring presence that I now barely noticed, my body having completely adapted to its cradle-like motion. The moonlight still poured through the panoramic windows, bathing the rows of empty, white-clad tables in its ethereal, blue-white glow. The scene was unchanged, yet my perception of it had deepened. It no longer felt like an empty room, but like a grand, private salon, a silent, beautiful ballroom that had been reserved for me alone. My eyes scanned the rows of small tables, each one a perfect solitary island. Any one of them would have been a fine choice, but I found my gaze drawn to one in particular. It was a small table, set for two, nestled right against the wide expanse of one of the great windows. It seemed to be in a perfect pool of moonlight, its white cloth glowing with a particular brilliance, the silverware upon it gleaming like slivers of captured starlight. It felt like the best seat in the world, a front-row seat for the silent, majestic theatre of the passing night. I made my way towards it, my footsteps silent on the thick carpet, the warm cup in my hands an anchor, a focal point in the grand, dreamlike space. The gentle rocking of the train was a constant companion, but my hands, wrapped securely around the cup, were steady, protecting their precious contents from the gentle, rhythmic motion of our journey. Arriving at the table, I paused for a moment, simply looking at it. It was a picture of perfect, waiting stillness. The two empty chairs, the neatly folded napkins, the gleaming forks and knives, all waiting patiently under the silent, watchful eye of the moon. I chose the chair that faced forward, in the direction of our travel, and pulled it out. The movement was almost silent, the legs of the chair whispering softly against the deep pile of the carpet. I lowered myself into the seat, the upholstery soft and comfortable. Then, with great care, I leaned forward and placed the cup and saucer on the table. The soft clink of the porcelain making contact with the tabletop was the only sound, a small delicate note in the grand, quiet symphony of the train. I slid the cup to the perfect position, right in the center of my view, its simple white form a beautiful, solid presence against the glowing white of the tablecloth. I was settled. I had arrived at the next stage of my evening's journey. For a long moment, I simply sat there, my hands resting on the table on either side of the cup, not yet touching it. I looked at the hot chocolate, a perfect, still circle of dark, creamy liquid in its white porcelain frame. A delicate wisp of steam, almost invisible against the moonlight, rose from its surface, a tiny, silent exhalation, carrying with it the promise of its warmth and fragrance. It was a perfect object, a small, self-contained world of comfort. The simple act of being here, sitting at this table with this warm drink before me, felt like an incredible luxury, a moment of such pure, uncomplicated peace that it seemed to exist outside of time. My breathing was slow and deep, my body completely relaxed. I was ready to engage my senses, to immerse myself fully in this perfect, solitary moment. I leaned forward slowly, lowering my face towards the cup. Before I tasted, I wanted to experience its aroma, to let that be the first true introduction. I closed my eyes, a gesture that always seems to heighten the sense of smell, and I inhaled, drawing the air in slowly and deeply. The scent that rose to meet me was divine. It was not the simple sugary sweetness of a child's drinking chocolate, but something far deeper, far more complex. The primary note was of rich, dark chocolate, a scent that was almost earthy in its intensity, with a faint, pleasant hint of bitterness, that spoke of its quality. But woven through that was the creamy, gentle sweetness of the hot milk, a soft, comforting aroma that rounded out the edges of the dark chocolate, creating a perfect, harmonious balance. It was the scent of pure, unadulterated comfort, but with an underlying layer of sophisticated elegance. It was a fragrance that promised both solace and a small, quiet indulgence. I took another deep breath of the fragrant steam, letting the scent fill my head, a warm, invisible cloud of pure contentment. The aroma alone was a kind of nourishment, a soothing balm that seemed to calm my thoughts even further, to smooth out any remaining invisible creases in my mind. Then I opened my eyes, reached out and wrapped my hands around the cup once more. The porcelain was still wonderfully warm, a deep, penetrating heat that was a pleasure in itself. I lifted the cup, bringing it to my lips. I could feel the warmth on my skin even before I tasted. I tilted it gently, and the first slow sip of the hot liquid passed my lips. The sensation was immediate, and it was perfect. The first thing I registered was the temperature, a perfect, comforting heat that was warm enough to be deeply soothing, but not so hot as to be jarring. It spread a gentle, liquid warmth across my tongue and through my mouth. Then the flavor arrived, a wave of pure, velvety richness. It tasted exactly as it had smelled, a deep, authentic chocolate flavor, rich and complex, beautifully balanced by the creamy, full-bodied milk. It was not overly sweet. The sweetness was just a subtle, complementary note, allowing the true character of the chocolate to shine through. The texture was sublime, a smooth, thick, velvety liquid that coated my tongue, a feeling of pure, liquid comfort. I held the taste in my mouth for a moment before swallowing, and I felt the warm, gentle path of the liquid as it traveled down, a spreading warmth that bloomed in my chest, a feeling of being warmed from the very core of my being. With a soft sigh of utter satisfaction, I lowered the cup back to its saucer. I let the warmth in my chest radiate outwards, a feeling of deep, physical contentment. Now, with the taste still lingering pleasantly on my palate, I turned my full attention to the world outside the window. The glass was like a cinema screen, immense and perfectly clear, showing a silent, ever-changing film of the nocturnal world. The train was moving at a considerable speed, yet the motion felt graceful, a smooth, effortless glide. The landscape was a hypnotic, flowing tapestry of darkness and silver light. Closest to the tracks, the details were a soft, indistinct blur, a streak of motion that was impossible to grasp. But further out, the world resolved itself into beautiful, dreamlike shapes. I watched as dark, rolling hills rose and fell against a sky that was not black, but a deep, star-dusted indigo. The moonlight was so brilliant that it etched the crest of each hill with a sharp silver line, while the valleys remained pools of impenetrable, mysterious shadow. It was a world of soft contours and deep secrets, a landscape that was sleeping a deep and ancient sleep. Every so often a single, solitary light would appear in the distance, a tiny, warm spark of orange or yellow in the vast, cool darkness. I imagined a small farmhouse, a single window lit in an otherwise sleeping house, and I wondered about the person awake at this late hour. Perhaps it was a farmer, rising early for their work, or someone sitting up late, reading by a fire. These small, distant lights were not signs of intrusion, but points of connection, quiet affirmations of other lives being lived out in the vast, peaceful darkness. They made the world feel not empty, but simply quiet, filled with a million sleeping stories. Then there were the trees. They appeared as ghostly, silvered silhouettes, their bare winter branches a delicate, intricate lacework against the dark sky. Clumps of them stood like silent, watching crowds on the hillsides, their forms softened by the moonlight. Solitary trees in the middle of fields looked like ancient skeletal sculptures, each one a unique and beautiful creation. As the train moved, my perspective shifted, and the trees seemed to move with me, the closer ones gliding past quickly, while the more distant ones performed a slow, stately dance, their positions shifting in a graceful, silent choreography. The entire scene was one of profound and unending beauty, a moving painting of the night, and I felt an overwhelming sense of peace just by being a witness to it. As I gazed at the world outside, I allowed my other senses to turn inward, to the immediate environment of the train. I consciously focused on its sounds, the constant rhythmic soundtrack to my journey. The most immediate sound was the steady, percussive beat of the wheels on the rails. Clack, 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 clack. It was a sound that could have been monotonous, but instead, It was deeply hypnotic. It was a perfect, unwavering rhythm, a mechanical heartbeat that was utterly reliable, utterly soothing. It spoke of steady progress, of a journey unfolding exactly as it should. Beneath that primary rhythm was a deeper, more constant sound, the low, resonant hum of the carriage itself. It was a sound that was felt as much as heard, a continuous bass drone that was the very voice of the train's power. Together, these sounds created a perfect mechanical lullaby, a complex symphony of motion and energy that was, paradoxically, the very essence of peace. And then there was the motion itself, the gentle side-to-side swaying that had become as natural and as unnoticed as breathing. Now, focusing on it, I could feel its subtle complexities. It was not just a simple rocking, but a more fluid, organic movement, a gentle rolling sway like being in a hammock on a breezy afternoon. I could feel the slight shifts in momentum as we navigated a long, gentle curve in the tracks, a subtle gravitational pull that pressed me ever so slightly into the side of my seat. The motion was a physical lullaby, a constant, gentle, rocking embrace. It was the motion a parent uses to soothe a child, a deep primal rhythm that speaks directly to the body, telling it to relax, to let go, to trust in the journey. The combination of the rhythmic sounds and the gentle, cradle-like motion was an irresistible invitation to a state of deep, meditative calm. Finally, I brought all the threads of my awareness together into a single, perfect moment. I reached for the cup again, my hands wrapping around its still warm porcelain shell. I lifted it, took another slow, luxurious sip of the rich, velvety liquid, and then I simply held it, cradling its warmth in my palms. I rested my elbows on the table, the cup held just below my chin, and I looked out the window. I saw the silvered hills drifting by. I heard the steady clack-clack of the wheels. I felt the gentle swaying dance of the carriage. I could taste the lingering, pleasant notes of dark chocolate on my tongue, and I could feel the deep, comforting warmth of the cup seeping into my hands. All of my senses were engaged, all of them bathed in a gentle, soothing stimulation, a profound sense of contentment, so deep and so complete it felt like a liquid peace washed over me. In this moment, there were no worries, no plans, no thoughts of the past or the future. There was only the gentle, moving present. There was only the train, and the night, and the moonlight, and the simple, perfect warmth in my hands. It was a moment of perfect sensory solitude, and it was everything I could have ever wanted. I lifted the cup again, the white porcelain a warm, solid presence in my hands. The rhythmic swaying of the train had become a part of me, a gentle, silent dance that my body now performed without conscious thought. I took another slow, deliberate sip. The liquid was still perfectly warm, and the rich velvety flavor of dark chocolate bloomed on my tongue, a wave of pure, uncomplicated pleasure. But this time something else happened. As the warmth spread through my chest, a curious and beautiful transformation began to take place. The present moment, as perfect and as peaceful as it was, started to soften at the edges, its sharp, clear lines beginning to blur and dissolve like watercolor on wet paper. The steady, hypnotic clack-clack of the wheels on the track began to fade, not into silence, but into a different, deeper quiet, a stillness that was not of a moving train, but of a house held in the reverent hush of a winter's afternoon. The silver moonlight that had been painting the dining car in shades of blue and white seemed to lose its coolness, its brilliance giving way to a soft, grey, pearlescent light that filled my vision not from the window beside me, but from a window that existed only in my mind. The warmth of the cup in my hands was no longer just the warmth of hot chocolate. It had become a key, turning slowly in a lock deep within me, opening a door to a room I had not visited in many, many years. I was a child. The feeling was so immediate and so absolute that it was not like remembering, but like becoming. My body was small, my limbs tucked into a compact, comfortable curl. I was nestled deep within the cavernous embrace of a great, soft armchair, a piece of furniture so large that it felt more like a small, upholstered den than a place to sit. Its fabric was a thick, worn corduroy, its wide ribs a soft, tactile landscape that I could feel through my clothes. The chair smelled of old books, of dust motes dancing in sunbeams, and of the faint, comforting scent of my grandmother's perfume, a fragrance of lavender and chamomile that had long since become a part of the very fabric of her home. And I was not just sitting, I was watching. Through the large window in the quiet living room, The world was being gently, silently erased by a curtain of falling snow. The light in the room was a soft, diffused grey, a unique and beautiful illumination that only comes on a day of heavy snowfall. It was a light that seemed to absorb sound, to encourage stillness and quiet contemplation. Outside the window, the snowflakes were not small, frantic flecks, but great, fat, lazy platters of white, each one drifting downwards with a slow, meandering grace, as if it had all the time in the world to complete its journey. They were so thick, so numerous, that they blurred the details of the world beyond, softening the sharp angles of the neighbor's roof, draping the bare branches of the old oak tree in a thick, soft ermine. I watched, mesmerized, as the snow accumulated on the dark wood of the windowsill, a tiny, pristine drift that grew imperceptibly with each passing moment. The world outside was in motion, a slow, silent, vertical river of white, but here inside, in the deep, warm heart of the armchair, I was perfectly, profoundly still. It was a moment of pure, untroubled observation, the world presented as a beautiful, silent, moving picture for my eyes only. My small body was cocooned in a heavy, comforting weight. A hand-knitted blanket was draped over me, its familiar presence a central part of the memory's deep sense of security. It was a patchwork of large woolen squares, some a deep forest green, others a rich autumnal gold, knitted together with a thick cream-colored yarn. The wool was slightly scratchy, as handmade things often are, but it was a familiar, honest texture that was more comforting than the smoothest of modern fabrics. Its weight was substantial, a gentle, reassuring pressure that made me feel anchored and safe, as if the blanket itself were a protective shield against the cold world outside. I could feel the intricate pattern of the stitches, the raised lines and soft woolen valleys, as I curled my fingers into its folds. The blanket held its own unique scent, a mixture of clean wool, the faint, cedar-like smell of the chest where it was kept, and the overarching, comforting scent of the house itself. It was more than a blanket. It was a portable hug, a tangible piece of my grandmother's love, and from deeper within the house, from the direction of the kitchen, another sensory thread wove itself into the fabric of the moment. It was the smell of baking bread, a warm, yeasty, almost impossibly comforting aroma that drifted on the still air, a silent announcement of warmth and nourishment to come. It was a smell that was somehow both simple and profound, the very essence of home, of care, of a kitchen that was the warm, beating heart of the house. The scent was not overpowering, but a gentle, pervasive presence, a warm, golden counterpoint to the cool, grey light of the snowy afternoon. It was a promise, a guarantee that this perfect, quiet moment would eventually be followed by another perfect moment, the taste of a thick slice of warm, fresh bread, its crust crisp, its inside soft and steaming. The scent was inextricably linked to the feeling of being provided for, of knowing that all my needs would be met without my even having to ask. My gaze drifted from the falling snow to the surface of the window glass itself. The cold outside and the warmth inside had conspired to create a breathtakingly beautiful work of art upon the pane. Intricate, feathery patterns of frost had bloomed across the lower corners of the glass, a miniature frozen forest of impossible delicacy. There were long, elegant fronds that looked like ferns, and complex star-like crystals that glittered with a faint internal light. The frost blurred the snowy world outside even further, transforming it into an abstract impressionist painting of soft whites and greys. I remember reaching out a small finger, my nail making a tiny squeaking sound as I traced the edge of one of the frost ferns, my touch leaving a small, dark spot of melted clarity in the intricate white latticework. This thin, cold, beautiful barrier of glass and ice was the only thing that separated my warm, safe, fragrant world from the cold, silent, snowy one, and it made the feeling of being inside, of being protected, all the more profound. All of these sensations, the sight of the silent, falling snow, the heavy, warm weight of the knitted blanket, the comforting scent of baking bread, the beautiful, frozen forest on the windowpane, all of them coalesced into a single, overwhelming feeling, the profound and simple certainty of being completely and utterly safe. It was a feeling that is perhaps unique to childhood, a state of perfect, uncomplicated security, of knowing with absolute, cellular conviction that you are loved and cared for. In that armchair, wrapped in that blanket, in that warm, fragrant house, there was no fear, no anxiety, no thought of tomorrow. There was only the gentle, peaceful unfolding present. The world was a great, soft, beautiful place, and I was in its safest, warmest, most perfect corner. And woven through it all, the final, perfect element of this memory was a sound. It was the sound of my grandmother. She was not in the room with me, but I knew she was nearby, moving about the house with her quiet, unhurried efficiency. And as she moved, she hummed. It was not a specific tune, but a low, soft, continuous sound, a gentle, contented murmur that was as much a part of the house's atmosphere as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was a sound that was slightly off-key, a gentle, tuneless melody that was the very sound of her presence. It was the soundtrack to my safety. It was a non-verbal, unconscious expression of her own contentment, and it flowed from her to me, a constant, gentle reassurance that all was well with the world. I remember snuggling deeper into the blanket, my small body a perfect sphere of warmth, closing my eyes and just listening to that soft, humming sound, letting it mingle with the imagined silence of the falling snow, a perfect, peaceful duet that lulled me into a state of sleepy, blissful peace. The soft humming sound was the last thing to fade. The scent of the baking bread dissolved first, a gentle wisp that simply vanished from my awareness. Then the image of the frost on the window pane seemed to melt away, the intricate, feathery patterns dissolving back into transparency. The feeling of the heavy, scratchy wool of the blanket loosened its grip, its comforting weight lifting from my limbs. The soft grey light of the winter's afternoon brightened, transforming, shifting its hue from pearlescent grey to a cool, brilliant silver. And as the grandmother's hum faded into the deepest recesses of my memory, a new sound, a familiar and beautiful sound, slowly rose to take its place. It was the steady, rhythmic, hypnotic clack-clack of the wheels on the track. The gentle side-to-side sway of the train returned, a physical sensation that brought me gently, smoothly back to myself. I opened my eyes. I was in the dining car. The moonlight was pouring through the great window, casting its ethereal silver-blue glow on the white tablecloth. The empty tables stood in their silent, elegant rows. The world outside was a dark, flowing tapestry of sleeping hills and distant, lonely lights. I was here. I had returned. I looked down at the cup I was still holding in my hands. A faint, delicate wisp of steam was still rising from the surface of the dark, creamy liquid. I had been gone for only a few moments, a minute or two at most, but in that time I had traveled years into the past and back again. The porcelain of the cup was still warm against my palms, its physical heat a solid, tangible anchor to the present moment. But now that warmth was mingled with another, more subtle heat, the lingering, gentle, emotional warmth of the memory. The hot chocolate had not just warmed my body, it had warmed my soul, rekindling a feeling of pure, uncomplicated safety and love that had been quietly sleeping within me. A profound sense of gratitude washed over me, for this train, for this night, for this quiet moment of solitude, and for the beautiful, affectionate ghosts that a simple, perfect taste could summon. The emotional warmth of the memory lingered, a soft, golden afterglow that mingled with the physical warmth of the porcelain cup still cradled in my hands. I took another sip of the hot chocolate, a final, small taste of its velvety richness, and then lowered the cup to its saucer for the last time. My gaze, which had been turned inward to the landscapes of the past, now drifted outward again, back to the vast, silent cinema of the night. The moonlit hills continued their slow, majestic parade, a procession of sleeping giants under a canopy of distant, diamond-sharp stars. The beauty of it was so profound, so absolute, that it seemed to demand a kind of silent reverence. My thoughts, once so full of the specific details of a childhood afternoon, were now quiet, empty, creating a space for the simple, overwhelming reality of this present moment to fill them completely. I watched the dark, flowing world, feeling not like a passenger on a train but like a stationary observer, a quiet eye around which the entire sleeping countryside was gently, silently revolving. For a long, unbroken stretch of time, the landscape outside was a constant flowing river of soft, silvery light and deep, velvety shadow. And then we moved into a pocket of deeper darkness, perhaps passing through a cutting between two hills or a patch of dense, light-swallowing forest. The brilliant moonlight was momentarily eclipsed, and the panoramic window, which had been a perfectly clear screen showing the world outside, underwent a subtle and magical transformation. The external world faded to a near-total blackness, and as it did, the glass began to perform its other function. It became a mirror and in its dark, polished surface, a ghostly, transparent image began to resolve itself out of the gloom. It was my own reflection, a faint, layered apparition that seemed to float in the deep, dark space between me and the passing night. I held myself perfectly still, looking at this stranger who was also myself. It was not a clear, sharp reflection like one would see in a bathroom mirror. It was a softer, more impressionistic image, my own features superimposed over the faint, streaking blurs of the darkened world whizzing by. But what held my attention, what made me catch my breath with a quiet sense of wonder, was the expression on the face that looked back at me. It was an expression of such profound and absolute serenity that for a moment I did not recognize it as my own. The eyes were soft, their gaze gentle and untroubled. The lines of the face, which I knew could be drawn tight with the tensions of a busy day, were completely relaxed, smoothed out by a deep, internal peace. There was the faintest hint of a smile on the lips, not a smile of active happiness or amusement, but the quiet, contented curve that comes from a place of deep, uncomplicated contentment. This person in the window was at peace. This person was utterly, completely, and beautifully at rest. A wave of feeling, so powerful and so gentle that it was almost overwhelming, began to rise from the center of my chest. It was a wave of pure, unadulterated gratitude. It was a feeling so clear and so strong that it was almost a physical presence, a warmth that spread through my torso, up into my throat, and out into my limbs, making my fingers and toes tingle with a gentle, effervescent energy. It was a gratitude that needed no words, no complex articulation, but I found my mind giving it a silent voice anyway, a quiet, internal monologue that was not a series of thoughts, but a single, continuous feeling given form. A silent thank you rose from my soul, directed at no one and everyone at once. Thank you for this moment. Thank you for this perfect, profound, and unexpected gift of peace. Thank you for the darkness that allows me to see myself in this new light. Thank you for the silence that allows me to hear my own quiet thoughts. Thank you for this solitude, so rich and so full that it does not feel like being alone but like being in the best possible company. This deep sense of thankfulness was connected, I realized, to the very nature of this journey. My thoughts, still calm and flowing, drifted to the concept of time itself. In the world I had left behind, the world that was waiting for me at the end of this journey, time was a tyrant. It was a thing of sharp edges and relentless demands, measured out in frantic ticking seconds, in the urgent ping of incoming messages, in the crowded squares of a digital calendar. It was a commodity that was always in short supply, a relentless torrent that pulled and pushed and hurried, a river that was always threatening to break its banks. Life was a constant race against the clock, a hurried dash from one obligation to the next, a state of being where a moment of true, unoccupied stillness was a treasure so rare it was almost mythical. We lived our lives by the frantic, staccato beat of a machine, a rhythm that was fundamentally at odds with the natural, gentle, flowing rhythm of our own hearts. But here on this train, time had been transformed. It had been rescued, redeemed. The tyranny of the second hand had been overthrown, replaced by a new and more benevolent ruler, the steady, rhythmic beat of the wheels on the track. That constant, hypnotic clack, 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 clack was the only clock I needed. It was a clock that did not measure minutes or hours, but the slow, graceful unfolding of the landscape, the steady, unhurried passage through the sleeping world. This was time not as a series of sharp, frantic fragments, but as a long, unbroken, shimmering thread of pure experience. Here time was not a thing to be beaten or managed, but a medium to be inhabited, a gentle, flowing river on which I was being carried without any effort of my own. The gift of this journey was not just the movement from one place to another, but the gift of unhurried, unstructured, beautifully empty time. The gratitude I felt was for this liberation, this temporary reprieve from the relentless pace of the world, this chance to simply be, to breathe, to exist in a long, beautiful, unbroken now. My silent, grateful thoughts then expanded, moving from the abstract concept of the journey to the tangible reality of the vessel that was carrying me. This beautiful, solid, warm carriage, this moving sanctuary of peace did not simply exist. It was the product of human hands, of human thought, of human care. And my gratitude, which had been a diffuse, atmospheric feeling, now began to focus, to find specific, albeit unseen, objects. I thought of the attendant in the dining car, the quiet guardian of the night. I pictured her in her small warm domain, wiping the polished counter, stacking the clean porcelain cups, her movements slow and deliberate in the late hour. Her quiet, welcoming smile was a small but profound act of service, a gesture that transformed a simple transaction into a moment of genuine human connection. Her presence was a comfort, a reassurance that even in this deep solitude I was being cared for. My mind then traveled forward, along the unseen length of the train, through the other sleeping cars, past the luggage compartments, all the way to the very front, to the engine, where another unseen person was performing their own quiet, vital ritual, the driver. I imagined a man or a woman, sitting in a dimly lit cabin, their face illuminated by the soft green glow of the instrument panel. I pictured their steady hands on the controls, their gaze fixed on the twin ribbons of steel that spooled out endlessly into the darkness before them. Theirs was a task of immense responsibility, yet I imagined them performing it with a calm, focused professionalism. They were the steady, beating heart of this entire enterprise, the silent, watchful eye that guided us safely through the sleeping world. I felt a quiet, profound connection to this unknown person, a connection built on a foundation of pure trust. I had placed my safety, my very life, in their competent, unseen hands, and in return, they were giving me this gift of a perfectly smooth, perfectly peaceful journey. And then, my thoughts traveled even further, not in space, but in time. I looked at the dark, polished wood that framed the window, at the smooth, solid brass of the door handle, at the intricate joinery of the cabin walls. These things were not made by machines, not stamped out on a production line. They bore the unmistakable mark of the craftsperson. My gratitude reached back through the years, perhaps through the decades, to the workshops where this carriage had been built. I imagined the woodworker, a person with calloused, knowing hands, carefully selecting the perfect piece of timber, their plane whispering across its surface, coaxing the beautiful, swirling grain into the light. I pictured the metalworker, their face lit by the glow of the forge, hammering a piece of raw brass into the elegant, functional shape of a handle. These unknown artisans had imbued this train with a part of themselves. With their skill, their patience, their dedication to quality, they had built not just a mode of transport, but a work of art, a vessel of enduring beauty and solidity. And now, all these years later, I was the beneficiary of their quiet, honest labor. To be here was to be held not just by a machine, but by a legacy of human care. My solitude was not an empty space, but one that was filled with the quiet, benevolent ghosts of all who had made this moment possible. This great, silent wave of gratitude and connection crested, and then slowly, gently, it began to recede, leaving in its wake a feeling of profound, quiet clarity. The internal monologue faded, its purpose served, and all that was left was a single, simple, serene resolution. It was not a grand vow, not a life-altering decision, but a quiet, internal promise, a gentle setting of an intention. The feeling I was experiencing right now, this deep, unshakable contentment, this perfect, quiet joy, was a precious thing. It was a state of being that the outside world, with its noise and its demands, would inevitably try to erode. But I knew, with a sudden and absolute certainty, that this feeling was now a part of me. It was not just a fleeting emotion, but a place within myself that I had rediscovered, a quiet, still room in the very center of my being. The promise was this: to not let it go completely, to hold on to it, not to grasp at it with a desperate, fearful clinging, but to cradle it gently, to protect it. It was like finding a small, perfectly smooth, warm stone on a beach. I would put it in my pocket, and in the days to come, when the world became loud and frantic once more, I would slip my hand into my pocket and my fingers would find it there. I would be able to close my hand around it and remember its smoothness, its warmth. I would be able to recall this feeling. I would remember the silvered hills gliding by in the moonlight. I would remember the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of the train. I would remember the peaceful, serene face looking back at me from the dark glass of the window. The journey would eventually end, but the peace it had given me, this profound and simple contentment, would be a souvenir I could carry with me forever. With this final, comforting thought, my internal monologue came to a close. I let out a slow, soft breath and looked back out the window, my mind now as quiet and as peaceful as the sleeping world outside. The final sip was gone. The cup was empty. The small ritual was complete. For a moment longer I remained seated, my hands still resting on the table, my gaze fixed on the endless silent film of the night. The feeling of deep, quiet contentment was a solid presence within me, a warm, still pool that had settled in my very core. The journey back to my cabin, I knew, was not an end, but simply the next gentle step in the evening's slow, graceful choreography. With a soft, almost inaudible sigh, a breath of pure peace, I prepared to move. I pushed my chair back, the movement making no sound on the thick, soft carpet, and rose to my feet. The train's gentle, rhythmic sway was a familiar dance partner now, and I moved with it, my body instinctively adjusting to its constant, cradle-like motion. I picked up the empty cup and saucer, the porcelain feeling cool now against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the profound warmth it had so recently contained. Before turning to leave, I took one last long look at the magnificent empty room. It was a scene of such profound and ghostly beauty that I felt a need to commit it to memory, to capture it perfectly in my mind's eye. The moonlight, a silent silver river, still poured through the great windows, transforming the rows of white-clothed tables into a field of luminous, sleeping flowers. The distant, solitary island of warm golden light at the attendant's counter was still there, a single, steadfast beacon in the cool, blue expanse. The car was empty. It was silent, yet it did not feel desolate. It felt peaceful, a grand, beautiful space holding its breath, dreaming of the conversations and the meals of other times, other journeys. It felt like a privilege to have been its sole patron, to have had this grand, silent ballroom all to myself. A soft, gentle feeling of farewell, a sweet and pleasant melancholy, touched my heart. I was leaving this beautiful space, but I was carrying its peace with me. With a final, grateful glance, I turned and began my silent journey back to my own private world. Walking back, I was profoundly aware of the change within me. The journey to the dining car had been one of quiet anticipation, of moving through a new and fascinating environment. This return journey was different. It was a journey of homecoming. The corridor of the sleeping car, which had seemed so new and intriguing before, now felt familiar, comforting, like the hallway of a beloved home. Its quiet, its soft, rhythmic lighting, its gentle, swaying motion, these were no longer novelties but the familiar and cherished characteristics of my temporary abode. My footsteps were silent on the thick runner of carpet, my body moving in a slow, easy rhythm that was perfectly attuned to the train's constant, gentle dance. I placed a hand on the wall as I walked, my palm sliding over the cool, textured wallpaper, and the deep, steady vibration of the train felt like the reassuring purr of a great, gentle animal carrying me safely through the night. The sounds of the journey, which I had so consciously analyzed in the dining car, were now a part of the background of my being, a comforting, ever-present lullaby. The steady, hypnotic clack-clack-clack-clack of the wheels on the rails was the rhythm of my own slowing heartbeat. The deep, resonant hum of the carriage was the sound of my own quiet, contented thoughts. I passed the other closed doors, each one dark and silent, and I felt a renewed sense of peaceful kinship with the unseen, sleeping travelers within. We were a small, silent community, each in our own private cocoon, being rocked and soothed by the same gentle motions, serenaded by the same mechanical lullaby. The entire train felt like a single, living organism, a long, beautiful creature gliding through the darkness, its precious cargo of sleeping souls held safely and securely within its warm, protective body. The journey through the corridor was a slow, meditative procession, a few dozen steps that felt like a quiet, peaceful eternity. And then I saw it, the familiar dark wood of my own cabin door, indistinguishable from the others, yet now it seemed to be imbued with a special, welcoming aura. I stopped before it, the empty cup and saucer held carefully in one hand. The soft brass of the handle seemed to gleam with a particular warmth under the gentle light of the corridor sconce. I reached out with my free hand, my fingers curling around the cool, solid metal. The feeling of it in my palm was the feeling of a key to my own private castle. I turned the handle, the mechanism moving with that same satisfyingly smooth precision as before. I pushed the door inward, and it swung open with a deep, soft whisper, revealing the sanctuary that had been waiting for me. The warm, golden light spilled out into the cooler, dimmer corridor, a silent, beautiful invitation to re-enter, to come home. I stepped across the threshold, and the transition was as profound and as immediate as it had been the first time. The moment my foot touched the deep plush carpet inside, the atmosphere changed completely. The air was warmer here still, and thick with a deep, profound silence that was entirely different from the quiet of the corridor. It was a personal silence, a silence that belonged to me. The gentle but pervasive sounds of the train's motion were instantly muted, softened, transformed from an external soundtrack into a deep, almost subliminal vibration that was felt more than heard. It was the feeling of being inside a perfectly crafted instrument, feeling the resonance of the music rather than hearing the notes themselves. I turned and pulled the heavy door closed behind me. It moved with its familiar, satisfying weight, and as it met the frame, it made that deep, resonant thump, followed by the sharp, definitive click of the latch. The seal was complete. I was home. The feeling of absolute peace, of perfect, unassailable security, washed over me once more, a gentle, welcoming tide. The cabin was exactly as I had left it, a perfect, still life of tranquility. The bed, with its crisp, white, turned-down sheet, looked even more inviting than before. My belongings rested neatly where I had placed them. The room seemed to exhale a quiet sigh of contentment, as if it were happy to have me back within its warm, protective walls. My first act upon returning was to find a place for the empty cup. I crossed the small space to the nightstand, its polished wooden surface reflecting the warm lamplight in a soft, liquid gleam. I gently placed the cup and saucer down, the soft clink of porcelain on wood, a tiny, delicate sound in the deep silence. The cup, having served its purpose, now became a small, quiet memento of my nocturnal excursion, a simple, elegant object that was now a part of my temporary home. With the cup at rest, my next instinct was to complete the ritual of my return, to once again shed the layers that connected me to the world outside my cabin, however small and peaceful that world had been. My cardigan, which had been a cozy, protective layer for my walk, now felt slightly too heavy in the enveloping warmth of the small room. I shrugged it from my shoulders, the soft, warm wool sliding from my arms. I held it for a moment. Then, instead of simply setting it aside, I took the time to fold it. I laid it on the bed, smoothing out the fabric with my palms. Feeling the familiar rustic texture of the wool, I folded one side over, then the other, my movements slow and deliberate, a small, mindful act of care. I folded it in half again, creating a neat, soft rectangle. This small, tidy act of restoring order was deeply satisfying, a quiet way of bringing the evening's small adventure to a neat and peaceful close. I placed the folded cardigan back in my travel bag, zipping it closed, the small metallic hiss, another quiet, final sound. Next, I sat on the edge of the bed and slipped my feet out of my shoes. The feeling of release was just as pleasant as it had been the first time, my sock-clad feet once again sinking into the deep, luxurious softness of the carpet. The shoes, having served their purpose of carrying me to and from my destination, were now returned to their place on the floor, a silent, resting pair. With these final small acts of tidying and removal, the transition was complete. I was fully and completely back within my sanctuary, dressed only for rest, with no other task before me, no other journey to make, except the final, gentle journey into sleep. The entire world was now contained within these four warm, quiet walls. The final act of preparing my refuge was to separate it completely from the world outside, to create a perfect, impenetrable cocoon. My gaze was drawn to the window. Through it, the dark, flowing landscape was still visible, a silent, moving picture of the night. It was beautiful, but I now felt a deep and compelling need for absolute enclosure, for a pure, unadulterated darkness that would be the final, gentle invitation to sleep. I reached out and my fingers found the edge of the heavy burgundy velvet curtain. The fabric was as thick and as impossibly soft as I remembered, its deep pile a delight to the touch. I took a firm but gentle hold, and with a single, slow, fluid motion, I pulled it across the window. The curtain moved with a smooth, satisfying weight, its heavy folds gliding silently along the hidden track. As it moved, it began to swallow the window, and with it, the passing world. The rectangle of dark, moonlit scenery began to shrink, the silvered hills and distant stars disappearing behind the advancing wall of deep, rich velvet. The movement was a slow, graceful eclipse, a deliberate and final drawing of the veil. When the edge of the curtain met the far side of the window frame, it fell into place with a soft, final thump, a sound that was absorbed by the thick fabric. And with that sound, the last vestige of the outside world, the last trace of external light was gone. The cabin was now plunged into a new and even deeper state of darkness and silence. The heavy velvet was not just a light blocker. It felt like a sound absorber too, the already profound quiet seeming to deepen, to become even more absolute, even more velvety. Now only one light remained, the main lamp on the small table. It cast its warm, golden glow throughout the enclosed space, making the cabin feel even more like a cozy, secret den, a warm cave sealed off from the night. But this light, as beautiful as it was a light for waking, for being. It was time to reduce the world even further, to narrow its focus down to the final destination. The bed. I reached for the switch on the lamp's base. My fingers found the small, cool toggle, and with a gentle flick, I pushed it down. There was a soft, internal click, and the golden light vanished. The transformation was instantaneous and profound. The room was not plunged into absolute blackness, but into a deep, soft, womb-like gloom, because one final, small light remained. It was the small, elegant brass reading lamp, and its focused, gentle beam was now the only sun in my tiny, private universe. It cast a perfect, warm circle of light upon the crisp, white pillows and the head of the bed, a gentle, focused beacon that did not illuminate the room but simply created a small, intimate pool of warmth and invitation. The rest of the cabin dissolved into soft, deep shadows, its details now suggested rather than seen. The world had been reduced to this, a small golden island of light in a great, soft, silent sea of darkness. It was a perfect, gentle, and irresistible summons to rest. The small golden circle of light was a destination. In the soft, deep darkness of the rest of the cabin, it shone not as a harsh illumination, but as a gentle summons, a quiet and irresistible invitation to the final stage of the evening's journey. It was a beacon of pure, concentrated peace, a warm and waiting island in a silent, shadowy sea. It called to the part of me that was weary, the part that yearned for the final complete surrender of rest. My body, feeling this silent pull, began to move with a slow, almost reverent grace, drawn towards that single perfect pool of warmth. Each step was a deliberate, silent glide across the deep plush carpet, a slow and dreamlike procession towards the promise of the waiting bed. The focused beam from the small brass lamp performed a quiet magic, picking out the intimate details of the scene, highlighting the subtle, woven texture of the pristine white pillowcases and the impossibly crisp, sharp fold of the turned-down linen sheet. Everything else, the dark wood of the headboard, the deep burgundy of the folded blankets, dissolved into soft, indistinct shadows, creating a small, perfectly lit stage for the final act of the day. As I reached the bedside, I stood for a moment, simply looking. It was a perfect composition of comfort, an artfully arranged scene designed for one purpose, to provide a sanctuary for deep and untroubled sleep. The air around the bed seemed warmer, imbued with the gentle heat radiating from the small lamp. A feeling of profound and imminent peace settled over me, the quiet, certain knowledge that I had finally, truly arrived at my destination. My hand reached out, the movement slow and languid, and my fingers brushed against the top layer of the bedding. It was a heavy blanket, its texture a thick, reassuring weave that promised substantial warmth against any imagined chill of the night. I took hold of its edge, and with a slow, steady motion I pulled it back, the heavy fabric folding over on itself with a soft, whispering sigh. Beneath it was another, lighter blanket, and I drew this back as well, revealing the final, most intimate layer, the linen sheet. It lay there, a perfect, smooth, unbroken plane of the purest white, its surface cool and impossibly inviting. My palm hovered just above it, and I could feel a distinct coolness radiating from the fine, natural fibers, a refreshing and clean sensation that was the perfect counterpoint to the warmth that awaited beneath. The moment had come. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, my body sinking into its surface with that same perfect balance of yielding softness and deep, underlying support. Then, with a final, fluid movement, I swung my legs up and into the bed, my body sliding smoothly between the cool, crisp sheet and the waiting mattress. The sensation was one of pure, unadulterated bliss. The immediate touch of the linen was a cool, silken caress against my skin, a feeling of absolute cleanliness and purity. For a fleeting second it was a shock of refreshing coolness, but it was a sensation that was already beginning to yield, to absorb the warmth of my own body. I shifted my weight, settling my hips, my back, my shoulders into the mattress, and I felt it conform perfectly to my shape, a gentle, cradling embrace that seemed to hold and support every part of me equally. It was a feeling of being perfectly nested, of having found the exact right place in the universe for my body to be. Then I reached for the blankets. I drew them up, one by one, enclosing myself in their layers of comfort. The light blanket came first, followed by the heavier one, and their combined weight as I pulled them up to my chin was a profound and deeply comforting sensation. It was not an oppressive weight, but a gentle, grounding pressure, a reassuring anchor that made me feel secure, protected, and profoundly safe. It was the feeling of being tucked in, a primal comfort that reached back to the earliest memories of childhood. A cocoon of perfect warmth began to form around me, the cool of the sheet now completely vanquished by my own body heat, which was being reflected back at me by the insulating layers of the blankets. I was in my nest now, a warm, soft, secure world of my own making, completely and utterly sealed away from everything else. A deep, bone-felt sigh of pure contentment escaped my lips, a soft sound that was immediately absorbed by the pillows and the blankets. I shifted onto my side, my body curling naturally into a position of repose. My head found the pillow, and it was a cloud of impossible softness. It yielded completely, its downy filling a soft, rustling whisper as it received the weight of my head, cradling it with a gentle, airy support. From this new, horizontal perspective, my perception of the world underwent its final, profound transformation. I was no longer an observer of the train's motion, but a direct participant in its deepest rhythms. With my ear now pressed gently into the soft fabric of the pillow, the sounds of the journey were no longer just in the air around me. They were inside me. The pillow, the mattress, the very structure of the bed became a resonant chamber, transmitting the train's lullaby directly into my bones. The steady rhythmic clack, 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 clack of the wheels was no longer a distinct external sound, but a deep, percussive pulse that I could feel in my jaw, in my chest. It was a soft, steady, hypnotic beat, the gentle, tireless heartbeat of the great steel creature that was carrying me through the night. And beneath it, the deep, resonant hum of the carriage was a constant, pervasive vibration, a low, sonorous drone that was the very sound of motion itself. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate at the exact frequency of deep, meditative calm, a gentle, mechanical mantra that resonated through my entire body, loosening the last, tiniest vestiges of tension from my muscles, soothing my very nerves. And the gentle, swaying motion, the cradle-like rocking of the carriage, was now a full-body experience, a slow, silent, side-to-side dance that my whole body felt as a single, unified sensation. It was a perfect, unending lullaby of sound and motion, a gentle, irresistible current pulling me slowly, inexorably towards the quiet shores of sleep. I lay there for a long, timeless moment, simply existing within this perfect symphony of comfort and motion. The warm, golden light of the reading lamp still cast its gentle glow upon my pillow, a final, small sun in my cozy, private world. My thoughts, which had been so active earlier in the evening, were now slow, soft, and indistinct, like clouds drifting on a gentle summer breeze. They held no weight, no urgency. They were simply the last fading embers of a conscious mind that was preparing to extinguish itself for the night. There was a profound feeling of rightness to this moment, a sense of a day brought to a perfect, gentle, and peaceful conclusion. There was nothing left to do, nothing left to think. There was only this warmth, this softness, this gentle rhythmic motion, this deep, profound, and all-encompassing peace. The final act, the final step, was now all that remained. With a slowness that felt as if I were moving through water, I began to extend my arm from beneath the warm, heavy sanctuary of the blankets. My hand emerged into the slightly cooler air of the cabin, a small, pale explorer leaving the safety of its cave. I moved my arm, my muscles feeling heavy and relaxed, until my fingers found what they were seeking. They brushed against the cool, solid, metallic reality of the small brass lamp on the wall beside the bed. My fingertips explored its familiar, elegant shape for a moment, before finding the small, protruding toggle switch. It felt solid and definite under my touch, a small mechanical anchor in the soft, sensory world of the bed. I paused for a beat, my fingers resting on the switch, in a final, silent moment of acknowledgement for its faithful, gentle service. It had guided me to this safe harbor, and now it was time to let it rest as well. Then, with a gentle final pressure, I flicked the switch. There was a small, satisfyingly mechanical click, a tiny, crisp sound that seemed impossibly loud in the deep, profound quiet of the cabin, and in that exact same instant, the world vanished. The golden circle of light was not just dimmed, it was gone, completely and utterly extinguished, and the cabin was plunged into a darkness so absolute, so complete, that it felt like a physical substance. It was not a frightening, empty blackness, but a soft, thick, velvety darkness, a gentle, womb-like void that was the very definition of peace. It was a darkness that muffled sound, that erased the boundaries of the room, that dissolved the very concept of space, leaving only the immediate, tangible reality of my own warm, comfortable presence within it. In this perfect, soft, and absolute darkness, my other senses bloomed. The feeling of the impossibly soft pillow beneath my head, the gentle, reassuring weight of the blankets upon my body, the deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very mattress I was lying on, the constant, gentle, rocking motion of the train as it glided through the unseen world, all of these sensations became my entire reality. The darkness was a gift, an act of final, gentle erasure that removed all distraction, leaving only the pure, unadulterated experience of comfort and motion. My mind, now without any visual input to process, finally, completely, let go of its hold. I took one last conscious breath. It was a slow, deep, and utterly silent inhalation, my lungs filling with the warm, still, blanket-scented air of my cocoon. I held it for a beat, a moment of perfect, suspended stillness, and then I exhaled, a long, slow, gentle release, and with that final exhalation, I released everything else. I released the last, lingering, fragmented thought. I released the final, tiny, unconscious knot of tension in my shoulders. I released my own awareness, my sense of self, my grip on the waking world. I felt my consciousness, which had been a single, focused point, begin to soften at the edges, to unfurl, to dissolve like a drop of ink in a vast, quiet ocean. The gentle, cradle-like rocking of the train was the last sensation I was aware of, a final, comforting motion that was carrying me away, not just through the sleeping countryside, but across the gentle, silent, and welcoming threshold into the deep, quiet, and dreamless void of a perfect sleep. The small golden circle of light was a destination. In the soft, deep darkness of the rest of the cabin, it shone not as a harsh illumination, but as a gentle summons, a quiet and irresistible invitation to the final stage of the evening's journey. It was a beacon of pure, concentrated peace, a warm and waiting island in a silent, shadowy sea. It called to the part of me that was weary, the part that yearned for the final complete surrender of rest. My body, feeling this silent pull, began to move with a slow, almost reverent grace, drawn towards that single perfect pool of warmth. Each step was a deliberate, silent glide across the deep plush carpet, a slow and dreamlike procession towards the promise of the waiting bed. The focused beam from the small brass lamp performed a quiet magic, picking out the intimate details of the scene, highlighting the subtle, woven texture of the pristine white pillowcases and the impossibly crisp, sharp fold of the turned-down linen sheet. Everything else, the dark wood of the headboard, the deep burgundy of the folded blankets, dissolved into soft, indistinct shadows, creating a small, perfectly lit stage for the final act of the day. As I reached the bedside, I stood for a moment, simply looking. It was a perfect composition of comfort, an artfully arranged scene designed for one purpose, to provide a sanctuary for deep and untroubled sleep. The air around the bed seemed warmer, imbued with the gentle heat radiating from the small lamp. A feeling of profound and imminent peace settled over me, the quiet, certain knowledge that I had finally, truly arrived at my destination. My hand reached out, the movement slow and languid, and my fingers brushed against the top layer of the bedding. It was a heavy blanket, its texture a thick, reassuring weave that promised substantial warmth against any imagined chill of the night. I took hold of its edge, and with a slow, steady motion I pulled it back, the heavy fabric folding over on itself with a soft, whispering sigh. Beneath it was another, lighter blanket, and I drew this back as well, revealing the final, most intimate layer, the linen sheet. It lay there, a perfect, smooth, unbroken plane of the purest white, its surface cool and impossibly inviting. My palm hovered just above it, and I could feel a distinct coolness radiating from the fine, natural fibers, a refreshing and clean sensation that was the perfect counterpoint to the warmth that awaited beneath. The moment had come. I sat down on the edge of the mattress, my body sinking into its surface with that same perfect balance of yielding softness and deep, underlying support. Then, with a final fluid movement, I swung my legs up and into the bed, my body sliding smoothly between the cool, crisp sheet and the waiting mattress. The sensation was one of pure, unadulterated bliss. The immediate touch of the linen was a cool, silken caress against my skin, a feeling of absolute cleanliness and purity. For a fleeting second, it was a shock of refreshing coolness, but it was a sensation that was already beginning to yield, to absorb the warmth of my own body. I shifted my weight, settling my hips, my back, my shoulders into the mattress, and I felt it conform perfectly to my shape, a gentle, cradling embrace that seemed to hold and support every part of me equally. It was a feeling of being perfectly nested, of having found the exact right place in the universe for my body to be. Then I reached for the blankets. I drew them up, one by one, enclosing myself in their layers of comfort. The light blanket came first, followed by the heavier one, and their combined weight as I pulled them up to my chin was a profound and deeply comforting sensation. It was not an oppressive weight, but a gentle, grounding pressure, a reassuring anchor that made me feel secure, protected, and profoundly safe. It was the feeling of being tucked in, a primal comfort that reached back to the earliest memories of childhood. A cocoon of perfect warmth began to form around me, the cool of the sheet now completely vanquished by my own body heat, which was being reflected back at me by the insulating layers of the blankets. I was in my nest now, a warm, soft, secure world of my own making, completely and utterly sealed away from everything else. A deep, bone-felt sigh of pure contentment escaped my lips, a soft sound that was immediately absorbed by the pillows and the blankets. I shifted onto my side, my body curling naturally into a position of repose. My head found the pillow, and it was a cloud of impossible softness. It yielded completely, its downy filling a soft, rustling whisper as it received the weight of my head, cradling it with a gentle, airy support. From this new, horizontal perspective, my perception of the world underwent its final, profound transformation. I was no longer an observer of the train's motion, but a direct participant in its deepest rhythms. With my ear now pressed gently into the soft fabric of the pillow, the sounds of the journey were no longer just in the air around me. They were inside me. The pillow, the mattress, the very structure of the bed became a resonant chamber, transmitting the train's lullaby directly into my bones. The steady rhythmic clack, 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 clack of the wheels was no longer a distinct external sound, but a deep, percussive pulse that I could feel in my jaw, in my chest. It was a soft, steady, hypnotic beat, the gentle, tireless heartbeat of the great steel creature that was carrying me through the night. And beneath it, the deep, resonant hum of the carriage was a constant, pervasive vibration, a low, sonorous drone that was the very sound of motion itself. It was a sound that seemed to vibrate at the exact frequency of deep, meditative calm, a gentle, mechanical mantra that resonated through my entire body, loosening the last, tiniest vestiges of tension from my muscles, soothing my very nerves. And the gentle, swaying motion, the cradle-like rocking of the carriage, was now a full-body experience, a slow, silent, side-to-side dance that my whole body felt as a single, unified sensation. It was a perfect, unending lullaby of sound and motion, a gentle, irresistible current pulling me slowly, inexorably towards the quiet shores of sleep. I lay there for a long, timeless moment, simply existing within this perfect symphony of comfort and motion. The warm, golden light of the reading lamp still cast its gentle glow upon my pillow, a final, small sun in my cozy, private world. My thoughts, which had been so active earlier in the evening, were now slow, soft, and indistinct, like clouds drifting on a gentle summer breeze. They held no weight, no urgency. They were simply the last fading embers of a conscious mind that was preparing to extinguish itself for the night. There was a profound feeling of rightness to this moment, a sense of a day brought to a perfect, gentle, and peaceful conclusion. There was nothing left to do, nothing left to think. There was only this warmth, this softness, this gentle rhythmic motion, this deep, profound, and all-encompassing peace, The final act, the final step, was now all that remained. With a slowness that felt as if I were moving through water, I began to extend my arm from beneath the warm, heavy sanctuary of the blankets. My hand emerged into the slightly cooler air of the cabin, a small, pale explorer leaving the safety of its cave. I moved my arm, my muscles feeling heavy and relaxed, until my fingers found what they were seeking. They brushed against the cool, solid, metallic reality of the small brass lamp on the wall beside the bed. My fingertips explored its familiar, elegant shape for a moment, before finding the small, protruding toggle switch. It felt solid and definite under my touch, a small mechanical anchor in the soft, sensory world of the bed. I paused for a beat, my fingers resting on the switch, in a final, silent moment of acknowledgement for its faithful, gentle service. It had guided me to this safe harbor, and now it was time to let it rest as well. Then, with a gentle, final pressure, I flicked the switch. There was a small, satisfyingly mechanical click, a tiny, crisp sound that seemed impossibly loud in the deep, profound quiet of the cabin, and in that exact same instant, the world vanished. The golden circle of light was not just dimmed, it was gone, completely and utterly extinguished, and the cabin was plunged into a darkness so absolute, so complete, that it felt like a physical substance. It was not a frightening, empty blackness, but a soft, thick, velvety darkness, a gentle, womb-like void that was the very definition of peace. It was a darkness that muffled sound, that erased the boundaries of the room, that dissolved the very concept of space, leaving only the immediate, tangible reality of my own warm, comfortable presence within it. In this perfect, soft, and absolute darkness, my other senses bloomed. The feeling of the impossibly soft pillow beneath my head, the gentle, reassuring weight of the blankets upon my body, the deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very mattress I was lying on, the constant, gentle, rocking motion of the train as it glided through the unseen world, all of these sensations became my entire reality. The darkness was a gift, an act of final, gentle erasure that removed all distraction, leaving only the pure, unadulterated experience of comfort and motion. My mind, now without any visual input to process, finally, completely, let go of its hold. I took one last, conscious breath. It was a slow, deep, and utterly silent inhalation, my lungs filling with the warm, still, blanket-scented air of my cocoon. I held it for a beat, a moment of perfect, suspended stillness, and then I exhaled, a long, slow, gentle release, and with that final exhalation, I released everything else. I released the last, lingering, fragmented thought. I released the final, tiny, unconscious knot of tension in my shoulders. I released my own awareness, my sense of self, my grip on the waking world. I felt my consciousness, which had been a single, focused point, begin to soften at the edges, to unfurl, to dissolve like a drop of ink in a vast, quiet ocean. The gentle, cradle-like rocking of the train was the last sensation I was aware of, a final, comforting motion that was carrying me away, not just through the sleeping countryside, but across the gentle, silent, and welcoming threshold into the deep, quiet, and dreamless void of a perfect sleep. Thank you for sharing this quiet moment with us. It is in these small, peaceful routines that we can find our calm. If this story brought you a little bit of comfort, a like and a subscription helps our bookshelf grow and reach others who might need a peaceful story tonight. We have another tale waiting for you very soon. Until then, sleep well.